Committee of the City Council of Baltimore. My name is Brandon Scott, Chairman of the committee. I am joined this evening to my left by Councilman Ryan Dorsey, Vice Chairman of the committee from the 3rd District, Councilman Burnett from the 8th District, member of the committee, Councilman Pinkett from the 7th District, member of the committee, Councilman Costello from the 11th District, Councilman Scheifler from the 5th District, member of the committee, Councilwoman Sneed from the 13th District, member of the committee, and to my right, Councilman Cohen from the 1st District, member of the committee. We are also joined by Kara Kuntz from the President's Office, and immediately to my right is Marshall Bell, staff to the committee. Tonight's hearing is on City Council Resolution 17-002R, Coordinated Agency Violence Reduction Strategy, for the purpose of requesting that the Baltimore Police Commissioner, the Baltimore Health Commissioner, Director of the Department of Public Works, the Director of Transportation, Director of Recreation and Parks, Director of the Mayor's Office of Employment Development, the Baltimore Housing Commissioner, the Director of CityStat, and the President of the Baltimore Development Corporation present to the City Council on a coordinated violence reduction strategy for Baltimore. This resolution is one that I introduced because, as we know, we have a violence epidemic in the city of Baltimore, and for far too long in our city, we have been looking at violence just through the lens of the police department. And we know, and it's been proven, that we were wrong in that. We have been wrong. We have to understand that violence is not going to be simply solved by the police department. That's something that they recognize and say all the time, and it is time for us as a city to start and to invest that way and make sure that all of our agencies are coordinated into reducing violence, because there is something that each and every city employee that works every day for our city that they can do to reduce violence. So this is why we're here tonight, and we're going to start by having Mr. Caron Banks as the mayor's representative, legislative representative to the city council. And we're going to start with you, Mr. Commissioner, if you want to proceed with the presentation.
Okay, good evening, and thank you, Mr. Chair and Mr. Vice Chair and members of the committee. I want to thank and acknowledge the Baltimore City team, both from the mayor's office, all the city agency heads, and their representatives that are here with us tonight. This is a team effort, and this presentation will reflect that. I also want to thank members of my BPD team that we have here tonight. So I'm joined by Deputy Commissioner Dean Palmier, Deputy Commissioner
Mr.
Jason
Commissioner,
Johnson.
could you please have them to stand so they can be recognized?
As I call your names, folks, just stand and remain standing. Deputy Commissioner Dean Palmier, Deputy Commissioner Jason Johnson, Chief of Patrol Mo Robinson, Chief of Detectives Stan Branford, Chief of Operations Sean Miller. I don't know if TJ Smith has arrived yet, but TJ Smith is the Chief of Media Relations, Chief Caroline Sturgis from our Fiscal Management, Inspector Rich Worley from Patrol, our Western District Commander Major Cherie Briscoe, our Northwestern District Commander Major Latanya Lewis, our Eastern District Commander, Major Darren Garrity, our Southern District Commander, Major Brian Hance, the Director of Legislation and Government Affairs, Jim Gillis, and from our DOJ Compliance Office, Sarah Ritter. And I hope I didn't forget anyone. So thank you all.
Mr. Commissioner, before you proceed, we have a bill report from the police department. Do you stand by that report?
I'm sorry, Mr.
We
Chair.
have a bill report on file from the police department. Would you like to comment, or do you stand by that report that you pre-submitted?
I stand by this report.
Thank you.
Okay. So the agenda, my eyes won't permit me to see that far, but I can see what's in front of me. So as we get through the first few slides of this PowerPoint presentation, the agenda and the speakers, I'll tackle the first portion, the Baltimore Police Department, the background on violent crime trends and the violence reduction strategy. Then we'll move to CityStat, the framework of CityStat and progress to date. And then you'll hear from agency heads who will describe the tools and resources that they bring to the public safety table for collaborative problem solving. And then the final part will be the next steps for collaboration, and that'll be presented by CityStat as well. The next slide. So as you can see, these are the number of homicides in the city going back to the year 2000. There's a pronounced spike in murders in the city that specifically occurred after the unrest of April and May of 2015. That's a undeniable fact. I think we are all concerned that the pace of the gun violence, as quickly as it seemed to escalate back in April and May of 2015, hasn't dropped like we anticipated that it would following the months and the year or so after the unrest. So reducing the increased pace of gun violence is the primary focus of the Baltimore Police Department. Finding creative solutions to these increases is our top priority. We're certainly not standing still. We've been working with the mayor and her team to find new approaches to addressing these increases, and we will implement them consistent with 21st century policing practices that are taking place throughout this country. We've traveled to all of the big cities in our country to see what they have in place in terms of crime strategies and philosophies, and we think that we are right up there at the top of the order with our strategies and philosophies. So we're moving forward tonight with a description of our collaborative approach, a whole team approach. The national trend, again, that I mentioned is something that's not unique to Baltimore. Big cities and large counties across our country are experiencing spikes in violence, homicides, non-fatal shootings, robberies, to be specific, across our country, and there are many reasons for that. The strong neighborhoods, they are the foundation for 21st century policing. There's no way around that. And so said another way, reducing violent crime, we need to improve the capacity of our neighborhoods and the various stakeholders in our neighborhoods, and we need to all find new and innovative ways, tangible ways to work together. That includes the city, the police department, community groups, and I know there are several community members here tonight, private companies, investors, and the like. In 2017, the Baltimore Police Department, along with city and community partners, is developing strategies that encourage strong neighborhoods with a deep understanding of the existing conditions and challenges that you alluded to, Mr. Chair, that have faced our city for a long, long time. So whether they be challenges with housing or unemployment, poverty, heroin addictions, education, you name it, they all play a role in public safety in Baltimore.
Mr. Commissioner,
Access, yes,
one
sir.
second, sir, just not to interrupt you, but just like to say that we've been joined by Council Vice President Middleton and Councilman Stokes from the 12th District.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So part of our strategy, the holistic strategy, is providing greater access to existing city resources that we need to implement to get to a better place. The end goal, of course, being a higher quality of life and lower crime rates, specifically violence. Next slide. Yeah, combating violence, violence reduction strategies. We have a focus in 2017, and we started on this focus, the planning for this focus, in the last quarter of 2016. It's about a few very finite things. We are focusing on people and on places. We've spoken a lot about the focus on the small amount of people that continue to disproportionately be responsible for violence in our city. We developed a trigger pullers list back in 2015, and that list grew to over 600 names of people who were not incarcerated but were living amongst us in our neighborhoods, who were prone to reoffend. The recidivism is something that's very real. Violent repeat offenders are very real. Retaliatory violence is very real. We narrowed that list down going into 2017 from over 600 to 132 people. So these 132 people are violent repeat offenders. They've been arrested, they've been convicted, they've been incarcerated, and they've reoffended again and again and again. They're the folks we need to pay attention to. We partner with parole and probation to make sure that they adhere to all of the limitations placed on them in their parole and probation status. And we added to that list persons of interest in homicides and non-fatal shootings. These are folks that we suspect were involved in murders and non-fatal shootings, but we just don't yet possess enough probable cause to charge them with those crimes. We know that focusing on persons of interest in these crimes, that's not the first time they pulled a trigger, and those crimes aren't the only crimes that they're involved in. So the focus on those 132 people are to identify any criminal acts that exist in their lives, and partnering with the state's attorney's office and the U.S. attorney's office to find not only an enforcement strategy to identify them and bring them to justice, but a prosecution strategy as well. When we talk about the places, and we're going to see later on in this presentation very specific geographical areas that we've identified that disproportionately have homicides, non-fatal shootings, robberies, burglaries, auto thefts occurring in ways that impact the crime rate for the entire city. And these won't be any surprises to anyone in this room. They are neighborhoods that have historically been underserved, and they have historically been disproportionately responsible for the violence in our city. We've reorganized our robbery unit. We've actually quadrupled the number of robbery detectives. Robberies, particularly youthful robbery offenders, have really plagued us throughout 2016 and into 2017. And while our juvenile robbery arrests have increased by 30%, the problem still persists. So it's more than just arresting those responsible for robberies. That's certainly a specific responsibility that the police department has, but if their families and their schools and their caretakers aren't given some other help to intervene in their lives to interrupt that cycle of criminal misconduct, they're going to be prone to offend and reoffend again and again. We've also recently added detectives to our homicide unit. We've added detectives to our non-fatal shooting unit in an effort to decrease their caseloads. For example, the industry standard for caseloads for a homicide detective in any given calendar year is 4 murder investigations per detective per year. Baltimore police detectives investigate 8 to 10 murders per detective per year. The Department of Justice report spoke about caseloads at length. We have high caseloads not only in homicide, but our non-fatal shooting detectives carry about 25 non-fatal shooting cases per detective. Even our internal affairs detectives carry about 20 to 25 cases per internal affairs detective as well. So adding people to homicide, to non-fatal shooting, and we recently added 114 to be exact, police officers back to specifically perform patrol duties, patrol sector responsibilities in our 9 districts. That occurred 2 or 3 weeks ago, and we're already seeing some dividends paying off from those reassignments. It was not easy making those reassignments. All those folks did really important things, but when staffing challenges us and a crime fight challenges us, we have to focus our attention on adding folks to patrol and to the investigative responsibilities of our police department. So when it comes to increasing staffing, hiring, and retention, you're all aware that the mayor recently unfroze 100 of the 225 frozen positions in FY17's budget. We're very grateful for that. We have about 130 existing vacancies that we're seeking to fill, so adding 100 to those 130 give us a real opportunity to staff up closer to our authorized strength in 2017. Interestingly, in the past 14 years in Baltimore, we only hired more people than we lost in 3 out of those 14 calendar years. So in only 3 of the last 14 years did the Baltimore Police Department actually bring on more people than we lost to retirement and resignation. And while last year's attrition rate was actually below the 5-year average, we retired or resigned about 18.1 police officers a month. We know that attrition rate needs to further stabilize. We recently are accepting 13 police officers back to the Baltimore Police Department who resigned over the past couple years. You're aware that after the unrest, for a variety of reasons. We had younger police officers who resigned and went to work for other Maryland law enforcement agencies. Well, 13 of those police officers are coming back, and we certainly welcome them with open arms. 2015 also was a year that we only graduated one academy class. We had to cancel 2 classes, and it takes a while to catch up when we're knocked down in a hole like that as well. And then finally, for this slide, the Gun Violence Enforcement Division that State's Attorney Marilyn Mosby created. We can't say enough great things about the Gun Violence Enforcement Division. State's Attorney Mosby has full-time dedicated prosecutors that simply prepare and prosecute gun cases. So this year, for example, we've made Baltimore police officers so far in 2017 have made 231 gun arrests. And those gun arrests, unfortunately, are misdemeanors, and it's very difficult to get any meaningful convictions. But we saw a need, and the State's Attorney's Office saw a need to better prepare those cases before they end up in a courtroom, and that's exactly what this unit does. They take a patrol officer's gun arrest, a detective's gun arrest, and they prepare it for prosecution. So they go obtain additional evidence, statements, they do whatever is necessary to strengthen that case for prosecution, and as a result, we're seeing more gun convictions in court, and that's a good thing for our community. Okay, can we go to the next slide? Okay. The violence reduction strategies. If you recall, I think it was February 2nd, the mayor had a call to action right here in City Hall, and she brought together many. It was a full room, so I can't begin to guess how many. Probably 95, right? 95 community leaders and other folks who really care about our city to come together and break off into groups and have conversations about solutions to combat violent crime. And it was a late meeting, but the mayor literally had to tell everyone to stop talking several times before we gathered back together, and each group presented some ideas that they came up with. And there's going to be a follow-up meeting to that. We can't combat the violence without the community. Some of the ideas were old ideas that worked at particular times in our city's history. Some of them were new ideas, and we want to take a look at all of those ideas and put them into action. The creation of place-based coordinated violence reduction strategies, transformation zones. I'm going to talk about the zones that are in place in Baltimore this year. We have 22 zones. And a zone is a geographical area that's really no bigger than 6 blocks by 6 blocks. So how do we select these zones? Well, the data tells us which zones to select. And I'll tell you what we're going to do in these zones with our city agency partners. But the criteria that we used to identify the zones that need public safety attention from the police department and from other city agencies were small geographical areas that had the most homicides, non-fatal shootings, robberies, burglaries, auto thefts, and 2 particular categories of calls for service. The discharging of firearms, that call for service, we added that into the equation, and calls for service from community members for armed persons. So the 5 crimes plus discharging calls for service plus armed person calls for service, and we added some historical information as well in the selection of these zones. But we know that if we collectively commit to provide better government, and policing is part of better government, to those small geographies, then we can really turn the tide for the entire city. And the selection of these particular zones does not mean in any way, any shape, or any form that we are not policing and employing new strategies in other areas of the city. So you'll see some slides with at least some of the transformation zones up here. but that doesn't mean that all of our resources are going into those transformation zones. It just means that the discretionary resources that exist on the police department, and they're very finite in number, but the centralized detectives who work out of operational intelligence, the operational squads, the gang detectives, the drug detectives, the vice detectives, and the auto theft detectives will spend a lot of their time in these zones, because if we win the zones, we win the city. Next slide, please. We modeled this after more than a couple jurisdictions, but we'll just mention two for the sake of brevity. Prince George's County has an existing Transforming Neighborhoods Initiative. You've probably heard about the Transforming Neighborhoods Initiative, TNI. Historically, the second most violent jurisdiction in our state. Prince George's finally dipped under a threshold of 100 murders a year when this strategy was employed. And it's similar to the strategy that we're going to describe to you tonight. It's not just about the cops. It's about the cops, it's about housing, it's about education, it's about public works, it's about health, it's about everybody coming together and working within a defined geography to bring better government to historically underserved families and individuals. So that initiative that started in 2011, really kicked off in 2012, has seen sustained reductions. Now, if you went back to the first slide of this presentation, you'll see some calendar years in Baltimore where the homicide rate dips. And then you'll also see the next year it goes back up. And it looks like a roller coaster ride because what's historically happened in Baltimore is that law enforcement has occupied geographies and has taken bad actors out of those geographies, and then there's been no maintenance of effort from any other parts of the government in those communities. So what goes down in terms of crime will go up if there's no maintenance of effort by government entities outside of the police department. The occupying army strategy that police departments used for far too many years in our profession's history will create an occasional calendar year or two where the number dips. But having that number dip and then stay there for 5, 6, 7 years, that's when we know that we're on the right path to a new philosophy and a new strategy. The next slide outlines the New York Police Department. I always hate to compare any jurisdiction to the NYPD, but they're doing some things really, really well in New York. We sent a team of our executive command staff, Deputy Commissioner Paul Meir, Chief Mo Robinson, Inspector Rich Worley, and my Chief of Staff, Drew Vetter, visited the NYPD. They have 77 precincts in New York, and over 50 of their precincts, they've adopted a Neighborhood Coordination Officer Program, NCO. And they borrowed that idea from the LAPD. So this started in Los Angeles. They were successful. New York adopted it. And basically, they identify police officers to serve as neighborhood coordination officers. Now, that is not a rebranding or retooling of community police officers. These are crime fighters. These are experienced and inexperienced police officers that run calls for service. They conduct follow-up investigations for minor crimes. They attend community meetings. They do a myriad of things in small, defined geographies that are prone to the most violence, and they work directly, and most importantly, for the sake of this presentation, they work directly with other city agencies. So if housing or transportation or public works needs something done in those defined geographies that the government says are going to receive our collective attention, the neighborhood coordination officers exist to make sure that all those dots are connected. So we didn't know what we would find when we went up to New York, but we were very impressed with that neighborhood coordination officer program. We're going to introduce it in Baltimore in our 4 transformation zones. So we're in the process right now of selecting 16 neighborhood coordination police officers in Baltimore. We'll assign 4 to each of the transformation zones, And they will not only be our immediate points of contact for any and all thing transformative in terms of government services, but they'll also be the direct persons of contact for the other city agencies. We can go to the next slide. These are the 4 transformation zones, and I apologize, it might be a little tough to kind of make out where they are, but starting from right to left, the Eastern District has a 6-block by 6-block transformation zone. The Northwestern District has a transformation zone. That's Lower Park Heights in the upper left portion of the map. The Western District, right there in the middle, has a transformation zone. And then where 3 of our police districts come together in an area that we call the Tri-District, the Western District, the southern half of the Western District, the northern half of the Southern District, and the eastern half of the Southwestern District, those 3 police districts come together to form our 4th transformation zone. So as you kind of look at that map and visualize really how small those geographies are, know that those are 4 of the most violent places in our city, and there they are. And that's probably not a surprise to anyone in here. But what should be something that is encouraging not only to us gathered here tonight, but our entire city, is that the city, at the direction of the mayor, has directed all of government to pay particular attention to making the lives of the people who live in those 4 transformation zones better. And how do we do that? We roll up our sleeves, we get down into the weeds of details, of projects, of initiatives, and then we take it to those neighborhoods. And we know that putting handcuffs on folks is often an unfortunate responsibility that we have to live up to. But again, to reiterate one last time, if putting handcuffs on bad guys who reside in those transformation zones or conduct their nefarious acts in those transformation zones would solve the violence problem, we wouldn't be here tonight because it would already been solved. So we really think that this collaborative approach, government approach, taking the government to the areas that are most in need of us will get us to a better place. And as you look at some of the particular challenges in those 4 transformation zones, on the left, the western and the eastern, you can see that the non-fatal shootings and the homicides have dramatically increased over the last several years. And on the right, the northwestern transformation zone and the Tri-District transformation zone, they see more of the robberies. And by robberies, I'm talking not only about street robberies of citizens, but carjackings and residential robberies as well. So those crimes disproportionately exist in those 4 transformation zones. Next slide. So the collaboration that's necessary, again, the anticipation of the selection of the neighborhood coordination officers. We're going to train these neighborhood coordination officers. The first school that we're sending them to is a 2-week basic investigator school that begins at the end of this month. And then we're also going to create another school for them that will introduce them to the other city agencies and the points of contact within those city agencies who will be their partners in this fight. So we're looking forward to that, and that is my last slide, and I believe I hand it over to Sam.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Mr. Director, please introduce yourself for the record.
Sure. First, thank you, Commissioner, and thank you, Chairman, Vice Chairman, and members of the committee. My name is Sam Sid, and I'm the Director of City Stat. Okay. So at this point in time, there is no more important issue in Baltimore than violent crime. And Chairman, like you said, as an administration, we believe that combating violent crime goes beyond just policing and requires a holistic approach. And so that's the work we've set out to do, and that's the work we've embarked on. So we started the work of aligning our resources collectively as a city government toward the fight against violent crime. And to do that, we've built a framework that emphasizes coordination and constant evaluation of our effort and progress. And the coordination needs to happen at 2 levels, with the starting point being internal coordination. And this is work that we've begun to date over the last few weeks. And this has involved getting everyone on the same page in terms of the various efforts and resources that we hold as a city government, and understanding how these resources can be used to fight violent crime, and how these resources can be used to address the quality of life issues in each of these 4 6x6 block zones. And to tell you about the conversations to date, we've gotten very specific in a short period of time, nailing down to the block level on issues like trash, lighting, and vacants, and I'm excited to see where the conversation goes as we move forward. The second level of coordination is community coordination, and that, I believe, is a very important next step. I will tell you at this point, our phase 1 is getting our ducks in a row as a city government, and the phase 2 will be engaging the community, and that's to come, to have them inform our strategy and our efforts as we move forward. On the evaluation side, we've already built processes both at the ANC leadership level and at the working group level for sharing information and tracking progress. We've also created a couple different tools, including an interactive map and some spreadsheets tracking service requests to track the conditions and various activities that are going on within each of the 4 zones. Moving forward, we'll be continuing to work on identifying clear deliverables by agency to track effort, and identifying outcomes to tell us whether or not we're being successful at a programmatic level. And with this work, we're lucky to have a good partner in Johns Hopkins University and Dr. Daniel Webster to help us nail down what our outputs and our outcomes are going to be for the work. So if we go to the next slide, our progress to date at the leadership level, we've already held 2 planning sessions that included each cabinet head that is with us today to discuss this collaborative, cross-cutting strategy to fight violent crime. We've also, as a cabinet, done ride-alongs as individuals, and I've been included in that effort, and I went on a ride-along 3 weeks ago in the Eastern District, which was an interesting experience. And I know many other people in the cabinet have done these ride-alongs, and many more will continue to do them as we move forward. And then going forward as a cabinet, we're going to meet every 6 weeks to discuss progress on this effort. We've also started at the working group level, where we've created 4 working groups, 1 for each zone. And each agency has identified a representative for each zone as a starting point, and we've held kickoff meetings, which were held last week. Moving forward, the working groups will meet every 2 weeks to continue the discussion on what information we have out there, and to make sure there's an accountability mechanism to track progress on the strategies that we're putting forth. So with that broad overview, we want to run through each agency's contribution to our violence reduction strategy. And with that, I'm going to turn it to Dr. Wen and the Health Department to start our agency discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Director. Dr. Wen, please state your name for the record, please.
Absolutely. I'm Dr. Lena Wen. I'm the Baltimore City Health Commissioner, and I'd like to thank Chairman Scott and members of the City Council for calling this important hearing today. We at the Baltimore City Health Department strongly believe that public health and public safety go hand in hand, which is something that Commissioner Davis and I talk about quite a lot. For me, as a scientist and as a doctor, we understand violence to be a public health issue. I mean, when there are people dying, of course it's a public health issue. I'm an emergency physician who's treated trauma victims, so of course it's a health issue. But we also know that violence is a contagious disease. And as such, it's something that can be prevented, it can be treated, and it can even be cured. And so we're glad to join with our fellow agencies here today under the leadership of Mayor Pugh to talk about this collaborative approach to reducing violence in our city. And so I'd like to talk about our 3-pronged approach that we use from the health perspective. The first is the most downstream, if you will, which is to interrupt violence at the time that it may be occurring. So I know that I've spoken to all of you before about Safe Streets, which is based on the National Cure Violence model. Safe Streets is an evidence-based approach. It is a public health approach. The idea is that we hire individuals who are the most credible messengers to walk the streets of our city and interrupt violence where they see it occurring. And in 1 year alone in our city, in 2015, for example, our outreach workers who work at the 4 sites in our city, they mediated over 700 conflicts. And the majority of those conflicts were later deemed to be likely or very likely to result in gun violence. So that's an example of a program that's not only a violence reduction program, but also a job and reentry program as well. So interrupting violence. The second is addressing a closely related issue, that of substance addiction and mental health. Here in our city, there are more people dying every year from overdose than there are dying from homicide. Actually, our 2016 numbers show that the number of people dying from overdose will exceed 600 in 2016. That's because of a drug called fentanyl that's about 100 times stronger than heroin. That's now being mixed in with heroin and cocaine, and it's killing people. I mean, these are our fellow residents. These are our neighbors and family and friends as well. So we have gotten the antidote medication, naloxone or Narcan, out to many people. We've actually, in the last 2 years, trained over 20,000 people in our city on how to save lives. And fellow residents, neighbors, saving neighbors, they've saved over 800 people in our city. The police department, under Commissioner Davis's leadership, has been an early adopter, and police officers have as well started carrying this life-saving medication, which for us is a part of this too, because we have to see addiction and mental health as part of the same cycle that we need to break. In addition, we also know that criminalizing addiction does not work, that we cannot arrest our way out of this epidemic. And in fact, enforcement is a part of it. We have to reduce supply, but we also have to reduce demand by getting people into treatment. So we've also been working on expanding access to treatment with our partners at Behavioral Health System Baltimore and with many other partners across our city. In that same vein as well, we've addressed mental health and trauma. We have been grateful in the last year or so to receive 2 major grants, one from the Department of Education to city schools to expand mental health and trauma services in our schools. And as well, we have received another grant to address trauma, especially in West Baltimore, from SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. And we believe that it's through these efforts that we can begin to break that cycle of violence and trauma and addiction and mental health. And finally, our third prong is what we call upstream interventions. Now, there are some maps that are included in your PowerPoint, and if I were to show you maps now of really anything in the city related to health, whether it's life expectancy or infant mortality or drug use, we know it's the same areas that are also the most heavily afflicted. The best thing that we can do is to start as early as possible. There's a parable that I think defines our work, which is you have 3 people, 3 friends, walking along, and they're walking along a stream. And the first person starts to see little kids floating by on the stream and immediately jumps in and starts to pull out these kids because they're drowning. The second person runs a bit further because he sees that there's a dam, and he tries to repair the dam. They see the third friend who's keeping on running, and they're wondering, why are you running? You should be saving kids right now. The third person says, but I want to see who is throwing in the kids in the first place. That's going upstream, literally going upstream. That's the work that we do in public health. So for example, if our kids are lead poisoned, that's not giving them a good start in life. Lead poisoning not only reduces education and educational outcomes, but also increases violence. Getting glasses for children. We launched a program, Vision for Baltimore, that's aiming to get glasses for every child who needs them in the city. We see that as a violence prevention strategy as well, so that kids don't have to be put back and labeled as being disruptive. That's a violence prevention strategy. We know these strategies work. We have our Be More for Healthy Babies program that we're very proud of in the city, that within 7 years of this public-private partnership, we have reduced the infant mortality rate in our city by 38%, an unprecedented number, saving on average 50 babies a year that would have died in 2009 that are now alive today. So I give you these examples because ultimately for us it's about investing in our youth to make sure that every child has the opportunity to be healthy and to thrive. So with that, I thank you for your time today, for paying attention to this critical issue, and for allowing me to give testimony on behalf of the Baltimore City Health Department. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nguyen.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman.
Good evening, sir.
Vice Chairman, members of the committee, and members of the council. It's a tough act to follow, Dr. Nguyen, but I'm gonna do the best I can. Most folks.
Mr. Braverman, please tell us who you are, sir.
I'm sorry. Michael Braverman. I am the acting Commissioner of Housing and Executive Director of the Housing Authority for Baltimore City. And in those roles, most of you know Baltimore Housing for the sort of more direct housing work that we do through through the Housing Authority of Baltimore City. And I want to just point out Nick Calais and Monica Watkins, who are here from the Housing Authority. A lot of the new council folks may not know them, but those are the folks. Nick, the Chief Operating Officer, and Monica, our Head of Engineering, which is like critical to keeping all these buildings maintained and capitalized. And Jason Hessler, who everybody probably knows, who runs demolition, litigation, just about everything else over on the HCD side. What you mostly know us for is the fact that we're housing 27,000 families, either through public housing or through the Housing Choice Voucher Program, and providing services, including job training and financial literacy, to our residents, and the human services work that we do and the work that we do to promote home ownership and to invest in existing homeowners' homes through weatherization work, slip and fall work, et cetera. But I want to focus a little bit today, not just on that, but on the stuff that we do collaboratively with BPD to address directly the criminal activity that impacts our neighborhoods, and especially in the transformation zone. So I want to just run through a couple of those things because you may not know those as well, and that's what I want to focus on today. And so one of them is something that we created in Baltimore Housing called the Property-Based Crime Solution Program. That's a fancy name, but what it means is we are available as a force multiplier to BPD. And we have been doing this consistently for years. And some of the marquee things that we do that you might recall is BPD was regularly addressing the criminal activity that the community and the residents at Madison Park North were asking for help with. And after many, many, many interventions by BPD, arrests, et cetera, the issue rose to how can we do something about the property because it's continuing to be a problem. If anybody has driven by Madison Park North recently, it's in the middle of demolition. And that's because Baltimore Housing, in the Property-Based Crime Solutions Program, revoked the multiple family dwelling license on the basis of the work that BPD did. So that's one example and I want to talk a little bit how those NCOs and Property-Based Crime Solutions can work together. A really good example is, for those of you who recall how difficult the 300 and 400 blocks of Whitridge and Lorraine were in Harwood, working very closely with a community policing officer who worked probably along the model that that Commissioner Davis, you're looking to have your NCOs do. You know, we continuously brought these kinds of actions, property-based actions, to shut down the couple of houses that were continually up and really preventing the neighborhood, the folks who live there, to appreciate their backyards or their front porches or to enjoy the quiet enjoyment of their properties. The neighborhood has changed considerably as a result of that collaboration. That's what we're looking to do in the transformation zones. We have an interagency task force that you'll hear many of us are involved in here collaboratively. It's often known as the Social Club Task Force, but we also play another role with BPD, and that is we are available. We go out 2 to 3 times a month after midnight with Vice and BPD to go through the problem businesses that are open at those hours, because BPD isn't always in the position to know, are they operating pursuant to code? Are they within their use permit? BPD isn't necessarily going to know that, but we do, and so we will go out with BPD. Places like this will be identified in the transformation zones, and we will go out. Problem property remediation, just the bottom line is there are some vacant properties in Baltimore City, and good examples in the transformation zone would be, say, the 1200 block on North Bradford, which is now down, the 800 block of North Bradford, which is half down, but an area where there's a lot of drug activity concentrated. And if you think about the 2700 block of Tivoli, nobody likes to deal in a football field, not in the middle of a football field. That's what the 2700 block of Tivoli looks like. And that was a crime-solving problem in addition to a long-time goal of the community. And that's the kind of work that demolition can do in the crime fight. We are, on the other side of the coin, blight elimination through rehabilitation is also, it doesn't just help the city in general and communities and neighbors who've been on blocks for long periods of time waiting to see some reinvestment come to their communities, but it comes along with a reduction in crime. So the work that we're doing in the transformation zone in the Eastern District, the 900 block of North Patterson Park is almost entirely occupied now. The 900 block of North Montford, houses are beginning to sell for a number that suggests the market is reviving, and there are investments and blight elimination strategies that we're working on in the Western Transformation Zone as well, that will, at the end of the day, improve outcomes for the community and drive the crime numbers down. Last thing I wanted to highlight was the illegal dumping work that we do, combating illegal dumping. So we have about 80 cameras up around the city. Illegal dumping sends a bad message to a community, and it makes it more difficult to police, and it makes it easier to engage in criminal activity. So having an affirmative program in Baltimore City, an aggressive affirmative program to address illegal dumping, to fence problem locations, is clearly a part of the crime fight. There's no impunity. If we will go through every piece of garbage. If we can find something, we will prosecute or issue citations, and we do that regularly throughout the year. So those are just a few ways that we're collaborating, and then across through these meetings that we have been having and our discussions with our colleagues, it came out that BPD pointed out in particular some of the trash that could accumulate in between pickups at Gilmore could be a problem for not just the residents and the community, but something that would also be a problem in the crime fight. And our colleagues at DPW stood up and said, that's something we can help you with, and it's part of the larger collaboration, not just with BPD, but across agencies to get outcomes in these transformation zones. So with that, I'll conclude.
Thank you, Mr. Braverman. Director Child, please state your name for the record.
Good evening, Chair, Vice Chair, members of City Council. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm Rudy Sham, the Public Works Director with Baltimore City. So today I'm going to be addressing 4 specific areas amongst many other things that we do in the department in basically working in collaboration with the BPD and along with other agencies in fighting crimes and violence. So the first area I want to mention is the boarding. Now, we all know many of the properties that are vacant, that has been boarded, and sometimes these vacant properties are being used by drug dealers and others, like homeless and so on and all that. We as a department would respond promptly and redouble our efforts in terms of addressing any of those boardings that's been breached. Now, one lessons learned is that we're going to switch from nails to using screws, and we're also making sure that the board is flush to the frame, so it's harder to pull the boards off. Now, the second area I want to mention is vacant lots. We all recognize the vacant lots sometimes creates a bit of areas that where the drug dealers and others that could be hidden things in the bushes and so on, all that. Now DPW do clean these lots, but at the same time we recognize that we really cannot clean our way out of this situation without the community's help and support and collaborations. So we, our liaisons, our DPW liaison, the community liaisons, will be reaching out certainly to the communities and providing any kind of support, such as any equipment as they need, such as rakes and brooms and or shovels or anything like that to maintain these lots. But at the same time, we certainly encourage these lots being adopted by the neighbors, by the neighborhoods, and therefore we have active participation from the neighborhoods in terms of maintaining these vacant lots. Now, cleanliness of the city is certainly one big major issues. And then as part of this so-called initiative, we are launching what we call a small hauler pilot program. This is something that we are rolling out in the coming months. The idea is that the thought is that number of these so-called illegal dumps are being carried out by small haulers, and these are unpermitted haulers. The fact that we're asking our haulers to drive all the way to Quarantine Road landfill to discard these items, we thought that if we should provide them with a more local solution, so we are opening up our Northwest transfer stations up to 7,000 pounds that these haulers can haul to the Northwest transfer station and dispose them that way. And then at the same time, we'll be working with Health Department to encourage those so-called unpermitted haulers to be permitted. And at the same time, we, through outreach, we are hoping that we can get these so-called haulers to work with communities, and the fact because they do serve the community they live in. So if we can coordinate this collaboration and the coordination efforts, encourage them to work with the community, that will certainly will be a win-win for us. Now, regarding to graffiti, we will be working with BPD when they determine that graffitis that may be tagged are gang-related and or others. Now, we are committed to remove these graffiti within 24 hours, but at the same time, we'll continue to address the 311 complaints as they come in regarding to graffitis. So you can see all these efforts are in collaboration and working in concert with providing an environment where our BPD and our other agency partners can better affect to carry out their responsibilities and duties in reducing crime in the city. With that, I'm turning over to Frank Murphy, Transportation.
Thank you, Director Chow. Mr. Murphy, please state your name for the record, sir.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and panel members. My name is Frank Murphy. I'm the Acting Director of Transportation. Department of Transportation is excited to be able to help any way we can in crime fighting strategies. The main thing I think we bring to the table is street lighting. We've got a couple things going on there. We have finished upgrading about 6,500 street lights throughout the city to what we call bright, high lumen LEDs. When you change LEDs, you can either keep the illumination about the same and get an energy savings, or if the real issue is getting more lighting, then we keep the wattage the same. No savings in energy, but you get extra lighting. And Monday of last week, I had the honor to be on a police ride-along with two really fine Southern District officers. And by the way, thank you, Major Hance, which really was kind of revealing in a number of ways, one of which is to see how much the officers really cared about the welfare of the people in the area where they were. Some people think that, police are locking up bad guys, but they're doing so much more, and it really comes out when you go on a ride-along. One of the things I was able to do was to point out some of the locations where we had done the upgrades to the LEDs, and the officers were saying how that's really helpful to them in crime fighting, which is good to know that, they were contributing. So that's kind of the proactive part. The reactive part is, when we get requests for extra lighting, we'll go out and do, a study, say, is it dark? If it's a dark spot, we have kind of three options we can do. If there's a fixture nearby that we can upgrade to a higher wattage and higher brightness, that's what we do. Another option is if there's a BGE pole in the area, like a power pole, they're typically the wood poles. We'll arrange with our colleagues at BGE to put a light fixture up there, and what we do is we pay a rental fee on that. The third option, of course, is if neither of those are in place, then we install a new foundation and pole and a street light. And we had a meeting just today on a program that's going to kick a lot of that into high gear with our colleagues at BGE. And that is that there's a couple ways where they're going to be really helping. This is an initiative that the mayor's really starting to upgrade lighting in the city. They're going to be looking more at zones that, as we asked them to, for how they can upgrade lighting with putting lights on other power poles, or even on some of the city poles. They have some ideas to put lighting on the back side of streetlights. Streetlights, typically lean over the roadway part as opposed to the sidewalk, and areas where sidewalk is dark or the tree canopy is such that it blocks the light, we'll be able to have them install lights on the back side of the pole, even on city-owned streetlight poles. So we have them now looking into the transformation zones. Actually, what I forgot to say was the initial 6,500 that we did were at locations supplied to us by the police department, because of course they know better than anybody where lighting will help in crime fighting. So we're having and a number of the transformation zone areas were already covered by that program, but there's part of them that haven't been, and we have our colleagues at BGE now looking at those areas to see how they can upgrade the lighting. Other things that we do that probably aren't as well noticed is traffic calming. And I remember back when the EBDI project started and they had done a lot of demolition and there was a drug dealing problem, and the police were looking for some help at monitoring the traffic literally that went in and out of the area because there was people coming from out of the area to buy drugs. We made some changes to street directions. And so that allowed the police, with a minimum of manpower, to monitor the amount of traffic that went in and out of this area. And that's the kind of thing that we're going to be reaching out to police commanders to see how might we be able to do things like that. Or, you know, if it's a speed hump thing where you have a getaway problem, how we might be able to do things like that to assist in crime fighting efforts. Lastly, this is one that you might not have thought about, but we've actually worked with police to install parking restrictions in areas where there was nefarious activities going on or the City Watch cameras weren't able to see what was happening. I remember, again, in East Baltimore, there was a place where the folks would park a van and conduct business behind it, and the City Watch camera, of course, couldn't see them, so we restricted the parking. So if they insisted on leaving the van there, we could tag it and tow it away, so that very quickly that activity went away. So I thank you for listening to Department of Transportation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director. Councilman, welcome back, sir. Please state your name for the record.
Mr. Chairman, it's a privilege to be back here. Bill Cole, President and CEO of the Baltimore Development Corporation. Thank you very much for your time tonight. BDC works with most of our sister agencies on these programs that we're going to highlight tonight. The most, obviously they're all connected, and some of them we work very closely with planning, and I'll get to that when we get there. But the Facade Improvement Grant Program is one that we've used hundreds of times over the years to help businesses improve their facade. Lighting is very important, replacing the lighting on the front of these buildings. And if they are doing a security camera as part of a facade improvement, we can fund that. If it's standalone, no, but if it's part of an overall facade improvement, we can certainly consider funding that. Main Streets program, some of you have Main Street districts. These zones touch on Main Street districts, so they're an important part of our strategy for improving commercial areas. The Links program is the one that we work very closely with planning on. Every agency here participates in the Links program. We've done successful Links initiatives on Greenmount already, and you're seeing the benefits of that. DOT has just installed some bump outs on the traffic calming following what Frank just talked about. Pennsylvania Avenue, we had an outstanding process for study there, and we're starting to see the improvements coming in. One of the things that BDC did was create a focus area, the Enterprise Zone, near Penn and North, to try to encourage businesses to relocate there. And that was at the encouragement of now Councilman Leon Pinkett when he was in the mayor's office. And the last piece is the Retail Business District Licensing Program that would allow business districts that have an RBDL to use that money to hire for security, additional lighting, street sweepers, and landscaping. The issue is that, Councilman, actually I think most of you, the fees have not been increased since before you were born. The council controls the fees on the RBDL, the tax, so to speak, to each business, and that hasn't been increased since the late 1970s. So if you want to use this program as a way to improve retail districts, the council would have to increase the fees that are charged to the business in order to make that work. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee and council. I'm Tom Stoser, City Planning Director for Baltimore. And again, I thank you for the opportunity to be here and be here with this large team who all shares the same goal of improving neighborhoods, reducing crime, and really helping Baltimore reach its full potential. So one of the highlights I want to mention is, I think, a significant victory that's coming out of the Transform Baltimore rezoning legislation, and that is the phasing out of those non-conforming liquor stores across the city. In the transformation zones itself, there are 12 liquor stores. 8 of them have proper zoning, but 4 of them are non-conforming or in residential areas, and these stores will be required to phase out from selling liquor within 2 years. And as our colleagues know, the liquor stores can tend to be some very nuisance areas, and they also create public health issues and are linked with added violence. So any reduction in those are, I think, going to be a big plus. And incidentally, there's 70 of those across the city that are going to be phased out. So that will be significant for a lot of neighborhoods. The other pieces of the puzzle that I want to highlight tonight are our various planning efforts. Our Green Network Plan, which looks at specifically distressed areas and taking vacant and abandoned properties and transforming them into community assets. Our various neighborhood planning processes, as well as a specialized one, Inspire, which is focused around the 21st century schools. And there is significant overlap in each of these efforts with the transformation zones. And it all harkens back, I think, to Commissioner Davis's opening remarks about it's really about building strong neighborhoods. So as we want to take these immediate actions collectively and from many different perspectives, we want to make sure it's in a holistic approach that builds towards a stronger community long term. So in all these planning efforts, we bring residents and stakeholders together to strategize on prioritizing improvements and where the problems are. And each of these areas can, I think, help bolster the transformation zone effort in that regard and maybe put some longer-term recommendations into play, removing blight, promoting investment, making strategic public improvements. Green Network Plan in particular, we know a lot of these areas are not necessarily in very strong market neighborhoods today, and that an immediate type of benefit can be the creation of some green assets that hopefully over time new development and new investment will want to cluster around, and we're here to help set the framework for that. We also, through our sustainability program, run a program called Care-a-Lot, which actually funds community groups to do some of that maintenance of vacant lots in their areas. And we're happy to be able to do that and partner with Parks and People Foundation on that as well. So we can take the lessons learned out of all of this and replicate them in other areas as we do more planning efforts across the city. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Good evening, Mr. Chair.
Please state your name for the record, sir.
My name is Andre Cowling. I'm the Chief of Schools for Baltimore City Schools. In Baltimore City Schools, as we look at our own readiness to lead, we've decided to invest our efforts in the following initiatives. First, in restorative practices. And this is not your typical restorative practices that we talk about in schools. This is restorative practices where it actually looks at both the child and their parents and looking at ways to help them de-escalate situations that they're often, that our children are often in. Oftentimes our children in schools, and we teach them how to de-escalate situations with each other, but we don't teach them how to de-escalate situations with other adults. And oftentimes that's where we see our children having the majority of their arguments now in situations that are with other adults. We've also created the Office of the Whole Child. This is a new initiative for us. And in this new initiative, it gives us the opportunity to marry strategy and implementation all at the same time. So we're able to actually, and I hate using the word track, but we're able to look at children as they enter into our schools on their very first day until they walk out of our schools for graduation, looking at opportunities, put supports in their place and in their pathway so that our children graduate what we like to call incident-free. The last piece is back to families again. As we have many community schools, We're trying to look at how we can make more of our schools mimic community schools, and that is having programming in our schools that actually address things for families throughout. So we were looking at, and I'll just talk a little bit about something that we were doing today with our schools. In community schools right now, about 20% of the schools in Baltimore City are community schools. We're looking at efforts now in which we could mimic those 20% of those schools and actually duplicate them up to about 50% of our schools this year. And it's not a funding issue for us, it's just the way we have our schools actually positioned. And we're pretty sure as of this moment that we're going to be able to help reduce the amount of violence in the transformation zones doing this. A big note is that the majority of our schools are not in the transformation zones, but the majority of our students live in the transformation zones. And so that's why we want to take these particular initiatives to see what we can do in this case. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Von der Sack, as you're coming up, Councilman Cohen has to leave, and I just want to give him a second to give a quick statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee and agency heads. Appreciate the approach to bringing everyone together and to solving this problem holistically instead of in a vacuum. With that being said, I have to run to a meeting of about 300 teachers, parents, and students who are deeply concerned about the funding deficit facing our city schools. And I would just say that when we think about public safety, if our young people are not taken care of, if we do not fill this hole in city schools, I worry about the ramifications both for our children, our families, and for safety in our streets. So I'm really glad to see, Mr. Chairman and members of the administration, that you've brought everyone together, and I hope we can continue this approach. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Von der Sack?
I'm Bill Von der Sack, Acting Director of the Department of Recreation and Parks. I want to take a minute to thank the mayor for bringing the city agencies together to collaborate with each other and with the police department on the Transformation Zone initiative. Thank you also, Chairman Scott and the rest of the council, for requesting a coordinated violence reduction strategy. I want to remind everyone of a term that Dr. Wen just used a little while ago, upstream intervention. Rec and Parks programs are upstream interventions, and there is plenty of research that proves the common sense knowledge that out-of-school time programs do a lot of things. They expose youth to less violence. They help reduce juvenile delinquency. They help to increase positive and reduce negative behaviors. They help improve children's educational performance. They help decrease health care costs. They help youth develop self-confidence, optimism, and initiative. They increase civic responsibility and participation. And they help reduce parental stress and thus impact health care costs and lost job productivity. It would be easy to list the various programs and leagues we offer, such as the Play Baseball program, started a few years ago with funding from Safe and Sound and expanded with funding from the President's Cup, for which we thank the council president, and with funding from Manny Machado. In 3 years, the program has grown to 51 teams. These are for kids like 12 and under. We have a spring after-school season and a summer season, and it serves kids that do not have transportation or a local baseball league. It would also be easy to talk about BNBL in its 37th year serving 800 youth, or the 1,600 youth football players, or Charm City lacrosse, or inner-city hockey, track and field, the 200 boxers at Upton, canoeing and kayaking, or the 1,000 kids that fish with us each year. It would also be easy to mention the teen nights that our aquatics division put together after the uprising, and we've had half a dozen of those every year without incident. But instead, I want to mention, just a couple of weeks in, a few ways this collaboration is working so far. In the Northwest Transformation Zone, we opened a renovated community center at C.C. Jackson and Park Heights. Major Lewis in the area discussed problems the merchants are having with the after-school kids getting off the bus along Park Heights Avenue. As a result, we are going to work with the schools to expand athletic programs at C.C. Jackson for these youth. In an effort to decrease the loitering by adults along Park Heights Avenue, we will work with Neighbors United, Park Heights Renaissance, and Park Heights merchants to make these adults aware of the open gym and workout equipment at C.C. Jackson. Perhaps they will spend their free time in the gym. C.C. Jackson is one of 10 centers in which we have expanded hours. We used to open at 1 p.m., and now we open at 8 a.m. at these 10 centers. The morning hours support senior programming and can also support programming for all those not in school. In the Southeast Transformation Zone, thanks to state funding brought back by then Senator Pugh and Delegate Branch and the rest of our delegation, we are going to reopen the long-shuttered Bocheck Field House and cut in a new baseball diamond so Bocheck kids can join the play baseball program. And finally, all across the city, thanks to a collaboration with Jason and the Mayor's Office of Employment Development, this summer we will have a new, more effective model for park cleaning that provides jobs for city residents. And to show how this collaboration continues to work, I just heard Director Chow talk about how he's going to incentivize illegal dumpers to use the Northwest Transfer Station instead of our parks, which is great for my maintenance staff because it means my maintenance staff will spend less time cleaning up after illegal dumpers and they can spend more time on courts and ball fields. So it's in that way that bringing all the agencies together is working to fight the crime. Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Jason Perkins Cohen. I'm the Director of the Mayor's Office of Employment Development. I think I am the 9th agency to speak to you tonight, so I'm going to cut right to the quick and focus on what we're doing a little bit differently. First, just a quick 30-second refresher on who we are, what we do. Our mission is to help people get jobs, and our mission is to help employers find their workforce. So we've got two customers. On the resident side, we split on the slide into youth and adults. And of course, on the employer side, we're talking about employers and businesses. So really, we have two strategies that we're employing on this initiative. The first is to increase access to services, and the second is to focus on partnerships, both partnerships with our sister agencies and partnerships with organizations that are in these neighborhoods that are doing good work. So on the increasing access bit, first thing we're doing or we're planning to do is actually to pay youth as interns to make people aware of the services that we have. We have good services, and we want to make sure that youth know about it, and employing our youth opportunity students, our young people, is a great way to both get them some money and get the word out on the street. So we're excited about that. The second is we're going to use our own van to go out into these communities to, again, partner with the community groups that are doing good work, to go straight there to make sure that they know about our services, and to literally bring them back to our centers if that's where they want to be and receive more intensive services. We're happy to do that. And the third is, on the increasing access, is literally to get out of our centers. We don't have to operate like it's 1977 anymore. So we're going to be going out into centers, neighborhood centers, offering our services on the spot. Earlier today, I was talking with Michael Braverman about how we will have a workforce development professional at the Gilmore homes at least 3 days a week, starting in May. So we're excited about that. And this is what we refer to as a community jobs hub model. So again, we are right there in the community where there's high traffic areas. We think it's a great way to do business. On the adult side, we've long understood the relationship, our responsibility to help people and the strong relationship between a job and reduced crime. As many of you know, our Mondawmin Center is sometimes called the REC, or the Reentry Center. It's a national model. Just last week I was in Charlotte. They want to create their own reentry center. And at the reentry center, folks who are coming out of incarceration or who have a criminal background can get specialized services that they need. For example, more intensive services around things like child support, adult education, IDs, and federal bonding. We also have partnerships. We've gotten 2 grants. One is our One Baltimore for Jobs initiative that came out of the uprising. We have partnerships with nearly 25 organizations that do occupational skills training. So we're not just talking about jobs, we're talking about careers in our growing industries like healthcare, construction, manufacturing, and the port. And so when we are employing these youth to go out into the community, when we're sending our van service to community centers, we're making sure that they know about these opportunities that already exist, so that we're driving the residents to these quality training programs to get help. And the last part I'll mention is on employers. We're forming a stronger partnership with Bill Cole and his unit so that we're literally partnering. We're traveling with them as they're going down main streets, Monument Street, retail business centers, so that they're hearing about the quality workforce that Baltimore has, and we're making sure that we meet their needs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. Ma'am, please state your name for the record.
Yes, good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the council. My name is Keisha Brown. I'm serving as the acting director for the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice. I'm actually the last agency director to present, so I will be very brief and right to the point about how looking to make sure that the Criminal Justice Office can be impactful, especially in these transformation zones. So we'll be deploying a prevention coordinator to assist the community in public safety efforts, as well as collaborating with other city agencies who are already engaging in activities so that we can act as a force multiplier. Also, as you can see, we'll have targeted outreach to violent, criminally engaged individuals. So we'll be lending customized assistance to the most vulnerable and active individuals engaged in criminal activity located within each of these zones. This will consist of direct contact to the individual and/or family member by a team comprised of trained city personnel, a vested community member, as well as a BPD lieutenant. We'll be leveraging resources within parole and probation, BPD, and other agencies to ensure that these individuals receive priority assistance in a myriad of areas. And with that, I conclude my presentation.
Thank you again, Chairman. Vice Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Sam Sid, Director of City Stat. And a couple things, I want to highlight why I think this effort is different. And it's 2 key points. I think this effort is different because we're coordinated across city government around a single issue. And I think it's also different because we are developing processes to make sure that our effort is sustained in this regard. And so I want to highlight a couple of the next steps that are key going forward. And so the first is our agency zone coordination meetings. As I mentioned, we've done kickoff meetings, and we did those last week. Starting March 1st, we'll be hitting 2 zones a week going forward, so every zone will get hit every other week. And this is when we really begin what I call our battle rhythm. And so we'll be doing that starting March 1st. Second, call to action. And Mayor Pugh held a call to action in February to engage the community on coming up with solutions for violent crime issues. And she'll continue this work in March at some point, not scheduled at this date, to host a second call to action meeting. Identification of deliverables and key outcomes. And this is the work that we're partnering with Johns Hopkins on. I want to thank Phil Leaf for being here as part of that effort as well. We're hoping to get this done by the end of March, where we can identify concrete outputs as deliverables and outcomes to evaluate programmatic successes. Community engagement. This is what I called phase 2, and this is the work that I think we'll be able to move to starting in April, and with the assistance of the neighborhood community officers that the commissioners bring on board as well. And last, the Bloomberg I-Team deployment. And assistance from these I-Teams will be coming in the near future, and this is going to be used to inform our efforts further with national best practice and other information. And so just recapping kind of what we're looking to do next, we can open it up to questions for any of our cabinet members.
Thank you. We'll start with myself, and then for council members, we're going to take questions in rounds of 3. So ask 3 questions, and then we'll go back around. I guess this question, Director, maybe should be answered by you, but I'm also going to use visuals to show exactly what I'm talking about. Thank you all for being here today, but and we're very pleased that you guys are coordinating these efforts, and we're going to be looking at things in a different way. But it still leaves a few questions that we want to have answered. First and foremost, where is it? No, I said I got it. How, on the ground level, how will agencies communicate? And by that, what I mean is, for example, if I go to a district commander who has one of these zones, will they be able to tell me who their direct mid-level manager counterpart is, for example, in housing, in health, in DPW? Will that communication be there? Is that communication there today, and how will that be true moving forward?
Right, and that communication will be there, and that's kind of the concept. We've taken two approaches to this. One is coordination at the agency level, and we've had a couple meetings in that regard. But we've also created these work groups for each zone, and so those aren't intended to be people that are at the director level, but people that are at that mid-level management. And even in our kickoff meetings, we brought together district commanders that oversee each of the zones and identified points of contact for each of the agencies. So that mid-level manager, that point of contact by zone, exists and has been identified by design as we've moved forward in this process.
So if you could take a look at the map that we're providing on the board right now, this shows the importance of why we have to coordinate, right? So basically what I have done is map everything bad in the city, and this is the Pennsylvania Avenue corridor, and you can see we know that's the area where we have a lot of high violence.
Right.
So if you look at any triangle that you see is red or black, is a shooting and or homicide. The blue ones are streetlight outages. The green ones are light green are narcotics calls and arrests. Dark greens are grass and cutting and boarding requests. Pink ones are dirty streets. Gold ones are dirty alleys. So, for example, if you look just in this specific area, so there's 2 homicides, and then we have requests for street lighters, and we have requests for health violation, we have requests for grass and high grass and weeds. So
Sure.
What you're informing us is that in the future, if I'm a district commander, right, I will be able to go to someone at DPW and say, listen, this is an area where we have a high level of violence, and we're having a problem with drugs, we have a problem with robberies, we have a problem with guns, and immediately they will act on that issue, because we know far too often, and
Sure.
I'm not going to click on them, you can look and see that someone, most of the times has been a citizen, but sometimes it is a police officer, makes a request for some vacant property to be cleaned in the border, or for some alley to be cleaned, or for some street lights to be put back on, and then 2 days later, someone dies at that location, or someone shot inside that vacant house. And had we had the coordination of the agencies and ratcheted that up to the level where teams are immediately going to respond to the request of those commanders, then maybe that person would still be alive today.
Right. I think you're correctly pointing out that a lot of these issues are interrelated, and that is, interwoven in the concept of this strategy. And again, going back to the creation of the working group teams, that's meant to be that ground level connection between the district commanders and the folks that are working at the agencies that can deploy people and get them out within the specific zones in a quick period of time. And so that's the strategy, is to make sure that the folks that know the zones and know the violent crime the best have points of contact at each agency. And in terms of a tracking and a delivery level, we'll be tracking service request response times for each of the zones. And so that's been something that we've already worked to create, and we'll be drilling into that as we go through these coordination meetings on an ongoing basis.
Have you to set time frames for example, if they make a request for a boarding? Have you set the tables for how long you expect that to be done?
I think that's an important next step, is setting zone-specific timeframes. We have citywide timeframes, but obviously we want to do a little better in the zones.
Thank you. My next question is actually a combo question for Dr. Wynn and Commissioner Davis. Have we identified, or do we know how many victims of homicides and non-fatal shootings are the family members, children, siblings, uncles, aunts, and nephews of other homicides and non-fatal shooting victims? And if we do, and even if we haven't, why haven't we looked at focusing on these young people and their families through a model like Family Strength and Economic Success, so that we can see those long-term goals? When are we going to get to the point where we can do that, where we know that if this young man's father was shot, or this young man's father is in jail for shooting someone, that he's a lot more likely to end up that way. And we can identify these young people and their families, invest in them and their entire families from the time they're in kindergarten, pre-K, third grade, whatever identifier that we have, so that we hopefully in the next 10, 15 years see a longer lasting reduction in violence.
And, Mr. Chair, I think that predictive nature of analysis is where we need to go. So the degrees of separation between non-fatal shooting victims, fatal shooting victims, and their loved ones and their neighbors is 1 or 2 degrees of separations at the most. So the databases that we have historically captured on the BPD and our databases and our intelligence is better than it ever has been. We need to figure out a way, the BPD needs to figure out a way to share that with our partners, because when those interventions can take place, you're exactly right, we may prevent someone from being a murder victim. So we are committed to exploring innovative, creative ways to share that type of victimology, whether it's with the health department or with the schools. We talked about the schools, and I know we don't like to use the word targeting because it implies certain things, but we do need to be aware that there are at-risk families and young people, and oftentimes we're not surprised when violence visits their doorstep because their brother was shot 2 weeks ago and he or she was a victim of retaliatory violence. So I fundamentally understand your question and your comment, and we're going to work really hard under this process, and Sam will figure out a way to do it, to try to get us to connect our existing intelligence databases with other city agencies.
Dr. Nguyen.
Chairman Scott, thank you for the excellent question. I want to tell you about a committee that I chair that I also invite you and any members of the council to come and attend, which is the Child Fatality Review Committee. This is a committee that is mandated by the state, led by the health department. It's the health officer in each area that leads it. But we also have people representing every city, state, agency that's relevant to children in some way that's at the table. We certainly have city schools, we have the police department, we have DJS, we have also many of the nonprofits that work in this space. And it's the hardest thing that I do in my job. The meeting is every month on a Monday, and every Sunday night I feel terrible preparing for it because we review every case of children who died in the city. And there is, kids die for, unfortunately, any number of reasons, including homicide from gun violence, but also from neglect, abuse, from accidents, from injuries, from many things. The one thing that these children have in common is that when we go around the table and we review the cases of these kids, in almost every case, they have a case file this thick. And so does their mother, so does their father, so does their caregiver, and we all wonder, where are the points of intervention? That's what we do as part of that committee. We look at what are the risk factors that lead kids there. So shootings are one very specific aspect, but we also look at what are the risk factors for kids who are at risk for abuse and neglect that result in death. We recently have expanded the mandate of this committee because we realized, I think to your point, that we can't just be looking at kids who died. We have to look at what about the kids who are the most at risk? How can we identify them? We have a preliminary report that I'd be happy to share once it's out. But again, I do invite the members of the City Council to come and attend, as I think that this is one of the many examples in our city of effective interagency collaboration under Mayor Pugh's leadership.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Commissioner, because as we said before, we can't just keep looking to the police to solve this problem. Their hands are tied and their resources are not going to solve all of these problems. Vice Chairman Dorsey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, everybody, for your reports, for being here today.
Put the mic closer.
I have like 2 pages of questions for everybody here, basically. I'm going to start with BPD because, again, I have a question concerning mental health. My first is kind of the transformation zone, and I'm concerned about, I guess, a sense of, you said, allocating disposable resources or to these areas wherever possible. And I'm wondering if it's kind of a euphemism for kind of hyper-local, hyper-policing. And I'm wondering, kind of what evidence there is that this does not just move concentrated crime somewhere else. And you also use the phrase, when we win the zone, we win the city. And I'm curious what really constitutes a win in that respect. And I'm also curious that when we are allocating more police resources to a concentrated area, what we have to say that the benefits are not negated, I guess, by potential trauma impacts of escalated police presence, especially considering the historic relationship of police officers and residents in Baltimore City, if this is not negatively impacting people's mental health in these communities. And so I guess I'm wondering if there's a response from both of you on that.
Sure. So, Mr. Vice Chair, I wish we had disposable resources. We have discretionary resources.
Sorry. Excuse me.
And I think you said a lot, and several questions were kind of woven into your commentary. So I think what I'm going to try to do is address it holistically. What we've been doing hasn't been working. It occasionally works, and we occasionally have a good year, and then we pat ourselves on the back, and then the crime spikes again. And the same neighborhoods, the same families, the same individuals who are disproportionately in contact with the criminal justice system stay in contact with the criminal justice system. We are treading water in the deep end of the pool. So more than a couple jurisdictions have tried this approach, this holistic approach, to not only bring the law enforcement piece of our business, because it's law enforcement is just a piece of what we do, it's public safety, but bringing the law enforcement piece and adding to it all these other city agencies and what they can bring to make communities better is the way to not only achieve reductions in crime, but enhance relationships with communities. If the only time people in Sandtown, Winchester see the government is when their brother is being taken away in handcuffs, they're going to have an antagonistic relationship not only with their police department, but with their entire city government. So we want to be part of the public safety approach to reducing violence. We don't want to be the singular factor. And the neighborhoods that are captured within these transformation zone areas, and at least with my experiences with them, they want to see the police. They want to be treated respectfully. They want the police to be responsive to their needs and interact with them humanely and respectfully, and they want us to engage in constitutional policing. But the folks who are often stuck by virtue of their inability to move in many cases, to gain employment in many other cases, to gain job skills, they live in those communities and they want the police. So it's been my experience in Baltimore that Baltimoreans like to see the police. They want to be treated respectfully and professionally and courteously. And that's where we've changed our entire outlook on training. We're training Baltimore police officers 80 hours this year as opposed to the traditional 40 hours. We are doing a lot to really shift some of the long-standing cultural barriers that have existed for decades between police officers and the community. And the zero-tolerance policing philosophies that visited cities like Baltimore just a few years ago created the gap between the police and the communities that we saw really manifest itself back in April and May of 2015. So I understand that your remarks and the trauma and the mental health, we're fully aware of the impact that crisis brings to families and neighborhoods, and we're in the crisis business. We often only interact with people and families and neighborhoods when they are in a crisis. So part of our community policing strategies have been to get to know citizens before they need us. And that's why we've been doing so many things with mediation for our young people, with Outward Bound and that experience at Leakin Park all of last year, the community mediation that the chairman kind of fostered us through. I think, Mr. Chair, 500 young people are scheduled to interact with Baltimore police officers this year. So we're doing a lot to outside of the traditional law enforcement to better engage with our community.
Thank you.
Sure.
Dr. Nguyen, she's walking up.
Vice Chair Dorsey, thank you for the question. I think that you and Commissioner Davis both touched upon a couple of really important points, which is that we all want to do the right thing. I mean, none of us entered public service, whether it's teaching or policing or health or housing or anything else, because we want to treat people badly or give them a traumatic experience. We found that really what we need are the tools to be able to do our job. We need the tools to change that long-standing mentality of treating people as perpetrators and instead seeing them potentially as victims of trauma themselves. So how do we change that mentality? About a year and a half ago, we started trauma-informed care trainings across the city. And members of every city agency, I can point to every city agency's MOED, MOCJ, Rec and Parks, really everyone at Housing and DPW, DOT, everyone participated in these trainings. And the idea, again, is that we want to equip individuals with the tools to address the underlying trauma. And these trainings have been incredible. I mean, it's not just social workers who are already inclined to attend who attended. It's also police officers who may never have had such types of training. And we've done over now 1,300 of these trauma-informed care trainings in our city, recognizing that we have a long way to go, but this is one step in the right direction so that we are addressing the root causes of our issues and equipping people with the right tools so that, you know, the saying that when you're a hammer, all the world's a nail, we don't want for us to use that approach anymore. We want to use the right approach to the issues that we face.
Thank you. I just wanted to kind of bring up that perspective that maybe not everybody is pro-police and that it's there's the potential that there is mental health and trauma-based harm being done when we have escalated police presence in very concentrated areas. I was going to ask Rudy Chow some questions from DPW. Yes. Great.
We got one more, sir.
Okay.
So we can go back around.
Regarding illegal dumping, the new Northwest transfer station, is that the only one of our transfer stations that is being open to these new small haulers?
First, let me introduce myself. I'm Dale Thompson, Deputy Director of Public Works.
Hi.
We only have one transfer station, and that's the Northwest Transfer Station, but that is not the only location that small haulers can dump. They can dump at the Quarantine Road landfill currently. Mm-hmm. And we would be looking at them being able to dump at the Northwest Transfer Station, which is right in the heart of the city.
So how about Bowley's and Sisson Street?
The Bowley's and Sisson Street, we have some haulers that will bring material, but that is for citizens that are, you know, doing some, let's say, cleaning out their yards. And we don't want that to fill up with small haulers. So it's citizens to bring their material to Bowley's, Cherry Hill, and to Sisson Street.
And is Northwest also going to be open up to citizens?
Yeah.
And I'm just, while I have some attention here, I'll just voice a personal experience that I've had. I've done a lot of home renovation myself, and I drive a small car. It's impractical for me to tear a lath and plaster wall out of my house and transfer all of the materials in my little Honda. I think that there's but I don't own a commercial vehicle, so I can't transport a large amount of material to a transfer place, even if I want to. And if I borrow one, it's probably somebody's commercial vehicle, so I can't take that into a place. I'm concerned about these transfer places actually prohibiting people from, in a practical sense, doing dumping legally through policy decisions that are made, as well as the number of trips that people are able to make into these transfer places on a daily basis, encouraging people to not use them.
Right.
And
Well,
that
we would look at that, but generally, when you're, let's say, cleaning out your basement or doing some repair work in your home and you're showing that you are a city resident, our attendants are going to, kind of give you some courtesy, but those are things that we would take into consideration.
great. I hope we can have some further discussion about that. Thank you.
Madam Deputy Director, before you take your seat and while the councilman is there, so based on the councilman's question, so we were informed today that this was basically done about the transformation zone. So the small haulers were going to be able to go from those zones. So we're expecting small haulers from East Baltimore to drive to Northwest Baltimore to dump their trash. I think everyone in this room knows that that's not going to happen. We know what's going to happen. They're going to try to take it to Bowley's. They're going to be denied, and they're going to do what everyone else does, and they're going to dump it right along Bowley's Lane, right by the dump, because we have to clean it up each and every day. I think that you should inform Director Child that we have to take a better look at this, because just practically, it makes no sense for someone from East Baltimore or South Baltimore to drive all the way to Park Heights to dump. There's many people who live in East Baltimore who've never been to Park Heights, so they're not going to drive their car there. They're just simply not going to do that, and we have to do things that are practical if we're going to make this thing work. Thank you. Councilman Burnett.
Again, thank you all for coming. So I also had
Speaking to the mic, Councilman, is being recorded.
my apologies. Also had a long list of questions, but I'll keep them short.
We're going to come back around.
Okay, perfect. So the first I had was for Commissioner Davis. You mentioned there was going to be kind of an effort for violent and nonviolent repeat offenders. Is there a role, and maybe this is kind of a dual question for the health department and MOED, but is there an opportunity to collaborate with those agencies as well? Because I mean, it's one thing to kind of target people and individuals, but it's a different thing to try and reform the behavior, help them kind of grow in other ways, and a lot of that time is connecting them with opportunity. And so what I didn't hear was, that they would also be targeted with mental health services or drug treatment services, or be targeted with job opportunities. So is there an opportunity for that to happen in this program?
So absolutely, and as a matter of fact, right now, our Community Collaboration Division is meeting with a few dozen recently returned citizens who need our help, and being able to connect them with services, job skills, just identification, all the basic things you need in life to be able to succeed. That's all part of it. Another thing we recently announced is the law enforcement assisted diversion with all of our partners. Press conference, I believe it was last week. So when we come across a person who's addicted to drugs and is in possession of a misdemeanor amount of narcotics, we, thanks to a grant, now have an opportunity to ask that person if he or she would like to forego a criminal arrest and instead enroll in some treatment opportunities. So that's helping people who are addicted, because I don't think anybody in this room thinks we should fill our jails with people who are addicted to drugs or people who suffer from mental illness. So making all those connections is part of this initiative, and down the road, and as we succeed with the transformation zones, we'll succeed because we'll be able to offer people and families alternatives to problems that they've faced for far too long without any collective help from their government.
Okay. And I guess the other piece of it is, and maybe some of the other initiatives you mentioned are targeting that, but are there also opportunities to collaborate with non-agency partners, to kind of address these issues as well. I mean, not to take away from the skill sets in the room, but there's also community-based organizations that are in these zones that I believe should be kind of tapped into, especially if we're targeting resources to those areas to also help build their capacity, but also they know their communities a lot better than someone who does not. And then, it's great to have, like I said, interagency work, but more opportunities to collaborate. Maybe this is also for Director Sid as well to consider in this partnership.
Sure, and I think that's something that we do right now. We need to do more of it. So identifying the community leaders and the nonprofit organizations that exist in these transformation zones and elsewhere to help us get where we need to go is something that is a big part of this. And I'll let the DC chime in because I probably forgot to say something.
No, it's, you're on the right track. And
Deputy, please state your name for the record.
Dean Palmieri, Deputy Commissioner of Operations. So these are some of the initiatives that we're working on collaboratively with businesses and private businesses. So we've already had people reach out to us that will offer job placement to convicted felons, things of that nature. We've also had an issue even recently. I know squeegee kids, for instance, who are out. We've partnered up with Dunkin' Donuts, and I think Starbucks offered job positions for some of these kids. So we're not only touching the kids, but reaching out to their families as well. So these are some of the things that are going on behind the scenes that we're getting momentum behind, we're getting support behind, and it's something that I know Mayor Pugh had mentioned during her meeting early on February 2nd as well.
And a follow-up, Commissioner, you mentioned that in each zone there would be a set of officers assigned to those zones. Would those officers, receive additional training, considering they'll be doing a lot more intense work with communities and interagencies in things like community mediation, de-escalation techniques, and just other methods to ensure that there's additional positive interactions? Because I do share Councilman Dorsey's concern that, one, this does kind of on the surface sound like methods that we tried in the past where we're throwing a lot of police resources in very targeted areas, which can be problematic. And so just want to make sure that are those officers receiving anything more, and also if they're collaborating between agencies, how are they receiving training within each agency so they have a deep understanding of what's available to each person that they interact or community that they interact with?
Full disclosure, we've tried only throwing police resources at problems before. And we've occasionally enjoyed reductions in crime that only go back up again. So we know that doesn't work. We're only a part of it. So I'll let the deputy and the chief patrol, Mo Robinson, they went up to New York, and that neighborhood coordination model, it's something we're going to try in our transformation zones, does just what you ask it to do. They're not there to put handcuffs on problems. They're there to connect the dots to the other city agencies. So they went up there and saw it firsthand. We think that we'll tweak it to make it fit Baltimore. But do you guys want to describe what you saw?
Sure. So, what's unique about the neighborhood coordination officers is the fact that they do get specialized training in various fields. So they're not specialists per se, they're generalists. They get training in investigations, they get training in legitimacy, training in community outreach and learning what resources are available to them. But they're also trained in how to build relationships within the community, not only the residents, but businesses as well. And I don't like to draw a lot of examples. One of the examples that we were made aware of in New York, we actually spoke to two officers. One was a 27-year detective who was on the verge of retirement just because he felt hamstrung. The other was a 2-year, 3-year officer who had a lot of energy. And the two of those paired up and went into a community in the 34th precinct. And one of the first things they did was they started outreach. And there was some gang issues, drug organizations that were operating, individuals that were using their idle time to do nefarious things. So they reached out, they started doing a graffiti cleanup with the community involved, with the other city agencies involved. There was a barber shop there that they were cleaning graffiti off the wall. They introduced themselves to the barbers in the barber shop. Unfortunately, one of the barbers, a day or two later, committed an armed robbery in that neighborhood. But the detectives, they became problem solvers, and that's the goal. So these neighborhood coordination officers were able to identify this individual based on a person that they met 2 days ago off a video that was captures evidence in the robbery. So, you know, they are essentially generalist cops, problem solvers. They work their schedule around the times that there are problems within that community, so they can attend community meetings, they can respond to calls for service, and they have that relationship to where they don't have to say, well, I can't handle this today, I have to call downtown to have detectives roll up. So, you know, these guys have the resources at their fingertips to deal with the issues in that community.
Thank you. And the last question, I know I had kind of some combos, but would be for Director Sid. And it's more around sort of how are we tracking these outcomes? I mean, it's great that that we have a lot going on and a lot of concentrated efforts in targeted areas. I'm all about that. But how are you differentiating? So, for example, we mentioned boarding, right? Boarding of vacant houses. How are we measuring the number of boarded houses in those particular areas as compared to something that would happen already? And then the other piece of it that I would say is some of the initiatives that have been mentioned today didn't seem to be targeted to the transformation zone, but seem to be programs that are already happening. So how are you also differentiating the outcomes that each agency is doing citywide as compared to additional effort in these very specific areas? And then the other kind of follow-up to that is, I mean, you gave us information on like the inventory of each agency. Could we get a kind of a document that could be posted online and publicly accessible that really speaks to what each agency is bringing to each transformation zone and what the goals are of each of those efforts, what the outcomes look like, how are you measuring success? What I'm really trying to get at is, and then also the accountability piece. When each agency head is evaluated on an annual basis, is this a part of the evaluation to show that, okay, you know, we did these in these zones, these are the successes that we had in these specific zones, so that we know, you know, it's great that things happen, but what are the goals for each of these, and how do we really what does success look like is really what I'm trying to get at, and how do we measure that, and is that publicly available, or will it be publicly available?
And the goal is to make that publicly available, but that is kind of the work that needs to occur, and that's kind of what we're going to be working on Hopkins with to drill down on into the next month. And it's important to distinguish. I think there's two ways that we want to track this in our working group meetings. And the first is through outputs. And those are just measures of effort, because we want to make sure that each agency is putting forth the activity that we want to see in each of the zones. And so, you know, there are reactive measures like service requests, which are a result of somebody contacting 311. But there's proactive measures that you kind of talked about. So, you know, a metric to measure our output by zone around boarding, for example. That would be something that we would factor in as an indication of effort to make sure that what we expect to happen in the zones is happening on an ongoing basis. The other term that you brought up, and I think this is maybe the more challenging thing to do, is to determine what the ultimate outcomes are that we want to see achieved by zone. And so from a very basic public safety standpoint, we want to reduce violent crime. But understanding what reductions we want to see, and then getting deeper than just violent crime, but also targeting some quality of life measures. Those are other things that we want to, make sure that we have identified, so we can, you know, really make sure we're evaluating whether or not we're having programmatic success, and B, we want to follow this, you know, internally on an ongoing basis, and, you know, eventually make this public as well.
Okay, and then to the last piece about like the accountability piece. How do the outputs and how you're measuring the success, how does that translate into how the staffing of each agency from the head down, or whoever's assigned to these zones, is evaluated for their effectiveness?
All right, so I mean, from an accountability standpoint, you know, the purpose of my process to some extent is to make people come in and answer for their performance, and make them answer for that performance on an ongoing basis. So to the extent that we're tracking indications of effort, we'll be holding them accountable to see certain levels of effort, and if there are drops in that effort, obviously that's going to be a discussion point. And so that's going to be, you know, part of how we're evaluating agencies, you know, within these zones and then across the board as well. We want to see the output around these zones that we've targeted as, you know, the important areas to focus on in terms of reducing violent crime in the city.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Sneed and Baby Ray.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, everyone, for being here. So I have a number of questions that's all centered around basically the same thing. So it's going to be for the Commissioner, Dr. Nguyen, and DPW. So first, I'm curious, when I think about Main Streets, I'm thinking about Monument Street and what's currently happening on Monument Street now, where you have loitering, where you have trash, and I'm also a bill code for the BDC as well. We have a new store, a supermarket that's there, but when you go to the next corner, you have folks loitering. So Dr. Nguyen, instead of us waiting for someone to get shot to come out, how often are we talking to the police department in the Eastern District as far as targeting some of the young men and women that are just hanging out on the corners? How often is that conversation had? Because you're prevented.
So I don't want to speak. I'm not Dr. Nguyen, but I think we can kind of get at that. So young men, particularly young men.
But how often are we having a conversation around Monument Street in reference to what's going on there? Because no matter when you drive down Monument Street, there's loitering, there's trash, and we want to bring businesses to Monument Street.
Sure.
And so we can't bring businesses to Monument Street if we have loitering, and we know what happens when we have a lot of loitering a lot of times, especially we had a shooting on Jefferson. We had violence on the street. So what are we doing to prevent this from happening? How are we bringing businesses into the neighborhood? Like all of these things all go together to me.
Right.
And so if we're talking about working together, I want to know what conversations are had beforehand on how we curb some of this.
So with that particular issue of loitering and what is the police department, the government doing about it, one of the takeaways from Mayor Pugh's February 2nd call to action meeting is that several people came up to us during the meeting when they were broken up in their work groups and afterwards, and they said they want to walk and talk with the police. They want to go out at night, during the day, and walk and see some of these problem areas. And they particularly mentioned young men hanging out on street corners, hanging out in front of convenience stores, hanging out in gas station parking lots. And what do we do with that? The old way of driving up to a corner and putting handcuffs on everybody and taking them to jail, that didn't work.
Right, not looking for.
So
correct.
the new way is all of us kind of figuring it out. So particularly with the Monument Street issue that you raise, and there's a whole lot going on over there. The Eastern District Commander is.
He's here.
Okay, you can sit. So we'll specifically address that, but just know that we have conversations daily, not only the BPD, but policing. What do police do about young men who loiter? So the way we used to handle it as a profession got us to the point that we're in right now. And it fractures relationships. It gets police departments in consent decrees when they disproportionately over-police certain communities, and it gives young men arrest records for contempt of cop offenses. So I say all that to acknowledge that we're aware of the problem, the challenge, and we just have to figure a different way out of it.
That's why I'm wondering, how often do you all talk, how often does your Safe Streets talk with city police department or Eastern Police District in reference to what happens on Monument Street? How often does the BDC talk to the police department about what's happening on Monument Street with vacant lots, with trash? I mean, it all goes together, and this is not something that's new. So I'm wondering how often.
We talk all the time.
Give me a number of how many times during the week or month do you guys talk, Dr. Nguyen, in the police department? I'm just curious.
Well, Councilwoman, I don't have a number, but Dr. Nguyen did buy me lunch 2 days ago. So I owe her the next lunch. We are more coordinated already than most people would believe, but we need to get better coordinated procedurally, right? So we have conversations about Monument Street. We have conversations about all different types of neighborhoods and challenges. So I'm not going to give you a number of conversations that has taken place between me and Dr. Nguyen about Monument Street.
So how often is it connected to the BDC then? Because that's a business. Did you eat on Monument Street? Did you have lunch or dinner whenever you guys met on Monument Street?
Councilwoman, I think probably the best takeaway from this exchange is to commit to each other that we'll have a specific sit down about the specific concerns that you have about Monument Street. So, and we'll bring the right players to the table, and we'll talk about what needs to happen.
And it's businesses. It's how do we make Baltimore City better? How do we make our main streets better? How do we get folks to stay in Baltimore? But if we're already not having those conversations, it kind of worries me that
we are having those conversations, and that's why this commitment by the city agencies who serve the people of Baltimore, it's unique. This hasn't been done before. It's something that Baltimore should be very, very proud of. It can only happen when you have a mayor that's committed to collaboration being more than a phrase used during a speech. This is a commitment from the top of this city on down, and that's why we're here tonight giving you our comprehensive, coordinated approach to public safety. It's something Baltimore, quite frankly, should be proud of this. It's no longer just the police department's responsibility to ensure that public safety is what our citizens deserve.
I'm just not going to be proud until families, children stop dying on the streets of Baltimore, and until communities feel like they're safe. It takes more than that. That's why I'm wondering what the number is, because that's why you have the transformational zones, because you already knew that this area was a problem. We already knew that what's going on in these communities. So that's why, again, I'm wondering how often are we talking about, or how often are we meeting, because these areas where this is not new. That's why Safe Streets were there. That's why.
Right, and you're right. So there's a lot of strategies in place that were basically built in silos. So this is a collaborative, and the collaborative, they meet every 2 weeks in subgroups, and they talk about these very issues. I'll give you an example. A lot of this is generational.
Deputy, can you pull the mic up some?
Yes, a lot of this is generational in the community. So the loitering is a lot of generational issues. And the purpose of this collaborative is to get loiterers off the corners and give them something productive to do, whether it's playing baseball at the new Bochek baseball field, getting the kids into programs that are close to home, or job placement, building that community, taking an individual. I have two friends I played rec league football with back in the 80s who have a business right on Monument Street. And these are guys, my age now, but they run a clothing store on Monument Street, and they came up, they were born in that neighborhood. So, when we talk about generational issues, we're looking at providing opportunity, reducing crime, and building economy within these neighborhoods. There's a family in East Baltimore, you may be familiar with them, had 9 siblings when I came on this job. They all chose the drug life. You know how many siblings are left? 2. One was just killed in January this year. So these are issues that we're recognizing to push forward.
So the next time we come, I hope that I'm able to say, how often are we talking? And you guys are able to say yes. And we talked about Monument Street, the 4 vacates that are on the 2300 block, and the trash that's around Monument Street, Northeastern Market, and that's picked up. I'm really looking for answers and the data that suggests that we've been around there, we've targeted that area, we've talked to Bill, and 2 more stores are coming. Something along that order, because now folks want to utilize what's in the district, and we're growing the business.
Osborne Robinson, Chief of Patrol. What I'll add is, as already been stated, we started the transformation zone meetings on March 1st. And so within those meetings, because I attended them, the district commanders who represent those zones, they brought issues with them to discuss with the department heads. So that was the starting block. So those communications are already on the way. And like Sam has already indicated, the measurables are put in place so that we have said these are some of the issues in specific places that we would like to see things done in these 4 transformation zones. And as a result, as they come back each and every other week when they come in, they will be able to look at the progression and be able to determine, hey, did we do what we set out to do? If we didn't, what was the problems and what's the timeline on getting those things done? And also continue to assess things that need to be done to make those areas better.
And so that will happen, let's say, in West Baltimore along North Avenue as well. Like, it's just not Monument
It's
Street.
all 4 transformation zones. All 4 transformation zones, they started their meetings on March 1st. I'm sorry, it wasn't February 1st. When was it? February 13th, yes. So, and we had those meetings, and they were breakout meetings particular to the district. So all 4 commanders didn't show up at one time. So the commander who represented the particular zone, so with Northwest, you had LaTanya Lewis. With the Eastern, you had Darren Garrity. With the Tri-District, you had Major Hance. And with Western, you had Major Cherie Briscoe. They brought the problems particular to those areas to their meeting to discuss them, to say these are the areas within the transformation zones that are problematic, this is why, and this is the city resource that we need in those particular areas. That will continue beginning March 1st, every other week.
Councilwoman Sneed, thank you for the excellent questions. I do want to clarify some of the work that we do in the health department. So if I can make 2 points quickly. The first is that we collaborate. All of our work in the health department is based on collaborations. I mean, I think unlike my colleagues who are here, when you think about public safety, you do think about the police department here. When you think about health in Baltimore, you don't just think about the health department. You also think about all the hospitals that we have that have budgets that far exceed ours. You think about all the community-based groups and neighborhood associations that also provide care and advocate for services in some way. A lot of our work is in partnership with the police department. Some of our work is not directly in partnership with them for a reason. Safe Streets. We do partner with the police department on specific aspects of Safe Streets, but Safe Streets is effective because we have individuals who are not snitches. I mean, they do mediations on the streets. They do mediations with individuals who are involved in criminal activities, and their credibility relies on them not directly coming back to the police to report on exactly what they heard. We have higher level conversations, the police commissioner and I and many of our senior level staff, but that's on purpose. Same thing for our needle exchange vans. We have needle exchange vans in dozens of sites across the city, and the credibility of needle exchange that serves thousands of clients across our city relies on them not getting arrested if they came to the vans to receive needles and syringes so that they can prevent HIV and hepatitis from being transmitted. We partner with community groups and hospitals and FQHCs, not necessarily directly with the police for that reason, although indirectly we absolutely do. So I just wanted to make that one point as well.
Right, and that's why I understand that because, and I can use my area as that specific area because I know that it's already work in silos going on, and I know that at some point you guys had to talk together about this because these are ongoing. McElderry Park is nothing new. Monument Street is nothing new. It's been there. It's been an issue that's been on the radar. So that's why I'm wondering. It seems to me it's like, okay, now that they said that, well, we've already been doing this in East Baltimore, and let me tell you what we've been doing on it, or it's been ongoing conversations. But like I said, next time I'll be looking forward to some straight numbers.
We look forward to providing them, and thank you.
Councilman Pinkett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple questions. And I, like my colleagues, I appreciate the testimonies that have gone forth and recommendations. But if I would be honest, I'm just a little bit disappointed. And the reason I am is because I see, I guess, economic opportunity and job creation as being central to addressing the violence and crime. And I haven't heard enough about, how are we creating jobs? How are we creating economic opportunity? Because, we can, if we're not giving or not providing for jobs at the end of this, this is just going to be a vicious cycle. So if that's not a part of the strategy, how do we plan on ending this? So can I hear something about, job creation, economic opportunity?
Councilman, obviously, wasn't prepared to talk about a specific job creator today, and Jason can talk a little bit about job training, because I think that's an incredibly important component too. The frustration that I'm facing right now is we're creating jobs in portions of the city. The challenge is connecting people in West Baltimore, in your district, to those jobs in under 90 minutes each way using some form of public transportation. It is the biggest problem we face when dealing with employers that are moving into the city. They've got job opportunities. It's how do we get Baltimore residents to those jobs reliably day after day after day. So the jobs that have been created on that Browning Highway corridor, they continue to grow. We've got 2 or 3 others coming in right now. And we meet with Jason right away when we got the employer in, and we say 500 jobs or 300 jobs, whatever the number is, can you help provide the training? We connect them. The next call we get is, we're having an attrition problem. We can't get employees to show up repeatedly. And you know, I think you've seen these maps that Baltimore Metropolitan Council did, that we have portions of Baltimore City, particularly in West Baltimore, that can't get to East Baltimore using less than 3 forms of public transportation and less than 90 minutes each way. It's not something that, unfortunately, the City Council or the City of Baltimore can fix, but it is having a direct impact on our ability to connect people to jobs that have a living wage.
Thank you, Councilman, for the question. And I agree, first of all, I agree with Bill that there's no doubt about it, and I don't think there'd be any disagreement among the council that transportation is a major issue. One of the things that we're trying to do to address this issue more broadly is to really fuse together a true workforce system. I referenced One Baltimore for Jobs. The whole point of One Baltimore for Jobs is just that, is to build this system. It's, you know, the reality is it's not just about that their jobs are out there. The reality is to how to connect people to the jobs. And I don't just mean the transportation. I mean the gap between the experience and the skill level of some of our residents and the requirements of the job. And that's why the campaign of One Baltimore for Jobs with these 25 partnerships is about occupational skills training. It's about working backwards from the job to find out what the specific requirements are from those employers, and then to build a specific training model that trains people for specific jobs. We can't do what has been done in the past, which is train and pray. Train and pray does not work, right? So it has to be working with an employer, finding out what their specific needs are. In our center, a week ago, last Friday, we had 20 employers around the table, some of Baltimore's largest, including Rudy from DPW. He was the only public sector representative in terms of talking about his jobs. And we're literally going around the room for 2.5 hours. We didn't expect to spend that much time, and we were happy to do it, listing what the jobs they can't fill are, what the skill level requirements are, what the educational level requirements are, what the criminal background issues are, so that we can map out a specific training strategy. Because if we don't have an intervention, you know, it's not, I wish it was as simple as just saying, here's a job and here's a person and boom, you've got a match. We do that for sure. I don't want to make it sound like that doesn't happen. That does happen. But in a lot of cases, there has to be an intervention so that the person is truly ready to go. And we have demonstrated with One Baltimore for Jobs that we've exceeded the federal government requirements. I just spoke to the regional, I mean, I don't know, this may not mean much, but the regional administrator says it's the single grant that he's most proud of in the entire region. But we got to do more of it. It's not enough, and we got to help more people.
And so can we enhance this strategy with a more robust approach to, you know, employment, job creation, the transportation piece that's critical to addressing that?
Well, I think Jason mentioned it in his presentation. We are quite literally pairing up now with my business development team and his business development folks. So they're going out together. So there's identified businesses that can expand. We're dealing with the workforce issues as we're discussing the expansion. So that's the first piece. And he and I talk all the time. The other thing, the creation of the enterprise, the focus area of the enterprise zone, using the tools that we have at our disposal to encourage light manufacturing, logistics, warehousing type opportunities to move into neighborhoods that can really use the jobs. We also have to have the real estate. And despite the fact that we have lots and lots of vacant properties, we don't always have available real estate where you could build a warehouse or you could build some type of small-scale manufacturing operation in neighborhoods. We have to be able to identify real estate that either we control or that we've got developers that are willing to make available, just like we've seen over on that Browning Highway corridor with the GM site and Sun Products moving out. We've seen all sorts of new warehouses popping up and new jobs coming in because of that focus area. I'm hoping we can find other areas of the city outside of just the new focus area we created in West Baltimore, because I think that will generate jobs if we can find the right partnerships.
Thank you. My second question was to Commissioner Braverman. It's a two-part question. You mentioned Madison Park North and the efforts to, I guess, eliminate the housing vouchers that were associated with that property. Well, maybe I said it right. but
No,
not eliminate,
please,
but
definitely not that.
no, well,
Okay.
the efforts that were made in order to, get that property into, I guess, hands of a developer to, redevelop the site to enhance the community. So, and that was a multifamily type dwelling. Are there similar efforts? So my first part of my question: are there similar efforts to, the single, 3-unit, 4-unit type dwellings where we constantly get a whole lot of complaints from neighborhoods, mostly, and sometimes people are saying they're Section 8, but we don't necessarily know whether they're Section 8 housing or not. But are there similar approaches to those individual houses? And then associated with that, when you set up your development clusters through your vacancy value, what kind of support are you getting from the police department so that when you're creating these opportunities, that when you're trying to bring developers, when you're trying to bring investment into the community, that the police enforcement is, it's coordinated with your attempts to bring development to those areas?
Let me take those one at a time and work it down. So when I mentioned Madison Park North, that's a multiple family dwelling. And the reason that I mentioned that one is because there's a series of tools that property-based crime solutions can use to be this force multiplier. In that particular one, the tool was the revocation of the multifamily dwelling license. So the theory there was based on the ongoing criminal activity and the failure of the owner to take reasonable measures to address the ongoing criminal activity. The Commissioner of Housing was going to use his discretion to revoke the license. The revocation of that license triggered HUD's abrogation of their contract to pay the project-based Section 8 at that location. That doesn't mean that any of the tenants lost their that the tenants lost their subsidies. They were able to convert to vouchers and move because that particular property owner actually went to court and lost it every single step of the way. But and so at the end of that, they basically, HUD came in and relocated everybody, gave everybody the opportunity to convert to a voucher and move to where they wanted to. And it's worth noting, with a project-based Section 8, HUD was doing the inspections and determining that life safety could be met based on physical conditions, even though our BPD was finding regular violence there, and yet it was being, each year they were passing on that what was called a REACT standard. But unlike a tenant in a typical Section 8 or a or a tenant in any other multiple family dwelling, it's very difficult to move when your subsidy is tied to the location. So tenants essentially become prisoners, landlords getting a regular check from HUD. We broke that cycle with that tool. Different tools would be applicable in a single family dwelling, in a 1 or 2 family dwelling. And so when I mentioned, just using as an example, Whitridge and Lorraine, in those cases, those were single family dwellings on the 300 and 400 blocks that we used a different tool, a statewide statute called what we call colloquially the drug nuisance statute, that allows the state's attorney or the city solicitor or community association to file an action to enjoin, to actually vacate the tenants from that location. And so we have tools for all those different types of locations, and even for commercial establishments. And so the goal is to be responsive to what the community is asking for, to be and working with BPD to improve the quality of life in these communities. So you'll have to walk me through the next one or two.
Well, the last one was related to, I know part of vacancy value is creating development clusters. And you can create the clusters, but if you bring developers, you bring investors into the area, and there's still significant criminal activity in these areas that you've determined are viable for development, then it works against your efforts to market those areas.
So on the larger scale, those are areas of collaboration that I know Commissioner Davis is open to going forward. But within the transformation zones, there are actually some community development clusters right there. So in the eastern one, off the top of my head, you have the area bounded by Eager and Ashland and Milton and Patterson Park. That's an area where we're seeing reinvestment. That's actually in one of these transformation zones. Would I like to see every one of those community clusters be a transformation zone? Yes, but I don't think that we have the resources for that at this time, but we have a great relationship that we hope we can leverage and get and promote better outcomes.
Okay. And my last comment is not directly for you, Commissioner Braverman, but just by the absence, is MOIT a part of this discussion? Because is there technology related to, these interventions? Do we have the broadband infrastructure for cameras, or where's technology in all of this? These efforts.
MOIT, you're referring Mayor's Office of Information Technology. Is that what you're? Okay. Well, in these particular efforts, the cameras are actually not connected in any central way. They're independent. The cameras, let's say the anti-dumping cameras we talk about, they're all run out of our operation, and they all record independently. But we work with DOT to put those cameras up in the dumping locations. DOT regularly assists us to sometimes we need to put a pole up in order to put a camera up. And we can always count on our colleagues at DOT for that. That collaboration is probably more associated with that.
And thank you for addressing the dump. I was thinking more of the City Watch type camera.
Oh, City Watch. I would have to defer to my colleagues at BPD for that.
And is the infrastructure in place to support those cameras, those efforts, and the monitoring, maintenance? I'm just assuming that technology would be a part of this enhanced.
It is. So with City Watch and the technology and the fiber that needs to exist and be improved in many areas, that's something that's ongoing between the police department and MOIT. Mm-hmm. So does MOIT have a role in this? Absolutely, they have a role. So we communicate on a regular basis with MOIT, particularly with our City Watch needs. 750 plus cameras right now, and I think we've got just over 250 privately owned cameras that are tied into City Watch. So it's something that we continue to pay attention to.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Councilman Schleifer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank all of you for putting together this packet and all this information. It's great to see people collaborating. I'm not going to get into all my questions that I had. I'll just make a statement and just one request on behalf of the committee, if possible, that when you do assemble, who's going to be responsible for what in different areas, if that can be communicated with us. Because the one thing that I didn't hear at all is how the council members and our staff can play a role in this. Obviously, we're the first line of defense. When people have an issue, they call us. And as you can see, we take these situations and issues very personally as we live in our districts and want to see some of these hot areas being addressed. And so it'd be very helpful for us if we know who in what department, in what zone, and what corner of the city we can call directly. We're not looking to call the directors for every issue that occurs. We would much rather contact somebody in middle level that is actually assigned to addressing that.
Councilman, thank you for that comment. I do want to point out a couple things. Well, we've assembled inventory lists, and we can break those down by zone so that we know what all the activities are by agency. And a second thing, and something that I'm noting as I'm hearing the conversation, is developing a zone-specific contact list, which we already have pretty much the framework of based on our working group participants, but we can do that and supply contact information if that meets kind of the ask that you have.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would assume that everybody in those zones and all the majors of the different departments would be interested to have that information and to circulate to their teams as well.
Yeah, I mean, everybody, in general with this effort, everybody needs to know everything. And so I think that, is certainly an area where we can connect everybody with a simple list to make sure those contacts are in place.
Sure. And just like this transfer zone, if you want to pilot one area first, you can start with the Northwest and then work your way in any other direction. Thank you.
Councilman Stokes?
This is for the commissioner. I want to know what was your zones, what were the outcomes, short-term and long-term? Also, we keep talking about Freddie Gray, but a lot of my communities, mostly African-American, didn't happen with Freddie Gray. That happened because this government, city government, sometimes transfer their monies to other communities that don't look like me, and that what happens, you have these vacant houses, then you have young kids who go through the school system, learn absolutely nothing, and then when they get out of high school, they can't do nothing with their hands. I think MOED, I think the unions, the school system need to be talking to the unions, so when those young people don't have them opportunities to go to college, they can do something with their hands when they leave high school. And then we wonder why they stand on the corner. You know why? Because they got to pay bills. They got children. They got utility bills. So to the commissioner, I need you to answer about the zones and what are the outcomes, short-term and long-term.
So, Councilman, the outcomes are to be determined and forthcoming. We think the outcomes will look like a lot of different things. So, the outcomes will certainly include reductions in violence, reductions in quality of life crimes, an increase in government services to those communities that you just described that have been historically underserved by the government. So as we threw together the criteria, or developed rather, the criteria to identify the transformation zones, there could certainly be more than 4 transformation zones. Every government has limited resources, so we took the 4 that had the most incidents combined of homicides, non-fatal shootings, robberies, burglaries, auto thefts, discharging of firearms, calls for service, and calls for service for armed persons. And then we added the historical perspective of folks who have served within the BPD for many, many years. So that's how those communities were identified, and we hope that the outcomes that we hope to see in very short order, and again, a lot of these conversations are underway, and I think our very first meeting was January the 26th. So we are meeting. I think Sam's doing a great job of keeping us all coordinated and keeping us all accountable. But I'm looking forward to visiting this committee again to talk about some of the outcomes.
So, Councilman, I think just to add a piece to that.
Speaking to the mic, Deputy. It's being recorded.
Your point's very well taken. This is both a tactical and strategic plan. So, there's things we could do now tactically that are underway, but there's things that are going to be more long-term that will pay dividends, maybe not this year, but 2, 3, 4 years down the road. So, particularly with youth. So, the youth that we can save today won't be tomorrow's criminals. They won't be our trigger puller list when they do graduate. Some agencies can do things that affect now. Housing, for instance, they're a little more strategic because there's processes that have to happen. But, getting that underway now and having those conversations now and moving this forward is both a short and long-term plan.
Well, the reason why I made the statement is because I had gotten some numbers that the city budget increased by 48%, and the school system budget is a -8. Something wrong with that picture. Extremely wrong with that picture because we don't provide, we talk about crime and grime, but we don't talk about education and opportunities for our young people. We don't give them the opportunities, and you use the example that the last person in the family was murdered. You know why? Because there never were opportunities for them. They only learn how to live on the street. So we can sit and talk about Starbucks and all these minimum wage jobs. Who can live off of that? I think the police department should be talking to the unions. I think MOED should be talking to the unions. So when these young people don't have the opportunity to go to college, they can come straight out of college, go into apprenticeship, so when they graduate, they won't be living off of Starbucks money, because you can't live off of that. So I'm kind of angry about the numbers on the 48% of the police increase, and we always balance the school system, the budget off of our teachers and our young people. That's appalling. We need to start having conversations, and I did talk to the CEO about having conversations with the unions, and she was excited about it. So I would like to see this whole group sit down and go talk to the CEO of the school system so the police department can provide that service to the kids that want to go to college. And a good example, Major Garrity, we talked about when somebody stopped and you don't want to lock people up, there should be a pamphlet to provide a service to them, maybe a contract, say we won't lock you up, you can get them some training, some program, methadone program or whatever they're in, and put it in their hand and provide a contract so they can sign it. And then if they sign it and they go through the program, then you don't always have to lock somebody up, because we're not going to lock our way out of this problem.
We agree.
So again, I'd like to see a conversation. Can we agree that the police department, MOED, the unions, the CEO of the school system sit down and start having a conversation? Because we're going to sit here and we can talk about this all we want, because we had, I think, Commissioner, you had a program where they had 3 shifts one time. That absolutely didn't work. So now we back here again trying something else different, and I've been talking to my Major Garrity about doing that pamphlet and provide that service and make that a project in the Eastern District. But I need some cooperation from other agencies.
Okay. And Councilman, I can talk to you offline. I missed your question or comment about 3 shifts. I missed that, but I can.
Well, I think one time you created 3 shifts, one time throughout the city, and it didn't work.
Actually, when I became the police commissioner, I reduced the number of shifts from 4, because that didn't work, to 3. So that's something that I did because we didn't have the staffing to staff for 4 patrol shifts. So I took what was in place and I changed it back to make it work for the police department.
Well, I would like to see the police department get involved with the unions and the school system to have a conversation.
Yes, sir.
That can help our young people too.
Yes, sir. We were really, on a daily basis, our police department is in touch with the school police. Acting Chief Ham does a great job there.
Councilman, you are now over your 3-question limit.
Okay,
sir.
but let me finish. That's the enforcement piece I'm not talking about. I'm talking about a conversation with our young people in the school system.
We'll continue those conversations, and again, 500 young people are going to go through a mediation program this year. Several hundred young people went through a outward bound experience with Baltimore police officers in 2016 that we're really proud of. So we're going to continue those conversations that are ongoing and work to improve each and every one of them.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. And Councilman, it sounds like to me that we've gained your vote on minimum wage increase in the city of Baltimore.
No, you did not.
My next question, this one actually, Dr. Wynn, is for you. We've seen that the Safe Streets model and models like it have had the desired impact. We've seen reduced violence and gun violence in those neighborhoods. Have we looked at how much it would cost us at the city of Baltimore to operate a Safe Streets or some like site in each of the 9 police districts, including expanding the ones that already existed? How much would that cost the city of Baltimore?
That's an excellent question. We have thought about expansion of Safe Streets a lot. We work very closely with Dr. Daniel Webster from Hopkins and many of our community partners, because every Safe Street site, so we oversee Safe Streets. We don't operate the Safe Street sites. We don't employ the outreach workers, and that's because the model of Safe Streets, again, based on this national evidence-based public health model, is that a community-based organization, strong community-based organization located in that community, has to be the one that recruits, that promotes, that organizes, that does the outreach. Again, the whole idea is they're from the communities that they serve as the most credible messengers. So we've been looking into this. So every site costs approximately $500,000 for what we call the ideal model, right? The model that we're supposed to have. We could also have a slightly scaled down version of that at about 300,000. So we currently have 4 operating sites in our city. We, as you all know, have in recent years really struggled with sustainability of Safe Streets because Safe Streets was initially grant funded. It was by private foundations and the federal government with the expectation that city and state funds would then be used if this model was found to be effective. And so the sustainability of our 4 Safe Street sites is an issue that we're continuing to work on, that Mayor Pugh has had extraordinary leadership so far in helping us to navigate. We would love to expand to other sites. Here's my concern. And this is the issue that I hope we'll all take into account. It's one that we, as the health department, we are over 80% grant funded. So of our entire budget, less than 20% of our entire budget comes from city general funds. So we struggle with this for Safe Streets and for many of our other programs as well. Funders are interested in a new site, which is, I understand why, right? They're interested in putting their names and their brand on a new site. That's great, and we're happy to help them launch a new site. But there needs to be, if there is going to be a new site, there needs to be sustainability for our existing sites. There also needs to be sustainability for that site, or else we then have the problem of using Safe Streets to reduce violence in that neighborhood. People come to expect Safe Streets. They see that it's effective. But then if it's taken away, and then we have many individuals who are now unemployed, that's not a great case, especially, we talked all this about jobs. I mean, these are individuals who many of them are recently released from incarceration, formerly involved in gangs and drugs, and may not be the easiest to find employment otherwise. And so we're happy to explore expanding Safe Streets, but given the issue of sustainability for this particular issue.
Thank you, and for my colleagues, so with Dr. Nguyen's numbers, at 500,000, 9 of them will be $4.5 million a year. In case you don't remember from yesterday's hearing, we're running a $5 million deficit in the Department of Transportation, mainly because we operate a free bus service that city residents do not ride. My next question actually is for you, Mr. Perkins-Cohen, for Moet. In these transformation zones, are we drilling down and having your folks focus with the police and parole and probation, with the folks that are coming home, the people that are most at risk to come back to these zones and other places in the city, but for the sake of the conversation today, to these zones who are most likely to be the recidivists of violence, and focusing on trying to get them jobs first, because we know if this young man who is in West Baltimore and Major Briscoe has seen him get arrested for robbery 5 and 6 times, when he's coming, before he comes home, if we're able to target him and partner him with some kind of job, if we can get him out of that life, that we know that we will see less violence in that area. Are we doing that? Are we drilling down to that level where we're looking at those people beforehand so that we don't ever have to get them back into the hands of the police? We can figure out a way to get them a job when they get home.
That is a great question and a great point. And I think that we are doing some of that and we can do more. And part of my point earlier was, we're not going to pretend like we can do it on our own. We need to work with community organizations that are in the neighborhoods, that are successful, that people trust. We found that to be a much more successful strategy. The reality is, for us, we need to form a relationship with the resident who's looking for work. We need to understand really what's going on in their life so we can address any challenges that may exist. And so by having our staff actually go and on site at some of these community organizations, it is a way to connect to the folks who, quite honestly, are not going to come into our centers. They're just not going to do it. They're not comfortable walking into a government building. And that strategy seems to be more effective.
Thank you. And please let us know how we can help you expand that, if there's some red tape that we need to help you cut down with state government or whatever to get to those people.
Thanks very much.
Director Brown.
Yes, I just wanted to mention, Councilman Scott, the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice looking to reshape some of our efforts to target those individuals. So as the Commissioner mentioned, that they identify trigger pullers, or those who are the most criminally active in the zones. So taking a team out and having a large intervention, if you will, then following it up with a parole and probation, a similar large intervention with also individualized discussions with each of them, following that up again with customized notifications at the individual's home with parole and probation. Sometimes if you partner with parole and probation, people show up because it's part of the process. And then the final follow-up being an additional custom notification without parole and probation. So specifically trying to target those who we often use enforcement tactics, but also trying to have another approach to say there are city services, there are community services, and people in the community who are vested in you being productive. And so we're hoping that that will additionally have an impact in those communities. So we're not just using city services, but also partnering with community-based organizations and community-based leaders to partner on those efforts as well.
Thank you.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that?
Yes, sir, go ahead.
I have a follow-up question to that. The governor discontinued the Public Safety Compact program, defunded it some time ago. Are you familiar with this program?
I'm not actually.
It has a proven track record of ending recidivism. There's a proposal was brought to my attention recently for the city to become the direct contractor with the state on this program, rather than leaving that up to the original organization. The original organization would actually like the city to pick this up, and it's got a track record of ending recidivism. I think that's something that we should consider putting on the table for the city to propose to the state.
I would love to follow up with you about the conversation. It sounds like maybe you've had some conversations about it, and then make sure that I'm up to speed as well.
It looks like Jason has some familiar with it also.
Yeah, just very briefly, I am familiar with the Public Safety Compact, and I would agree with you that it is a very successful model, and it is something that I certainly wish would be continued in some shape or form. I'm not familiar with the proposal that you've seen, but we need to have more strategies out there. We have a serious, obviously we're all here because we have these issues, and we just can't let successful programs wither away.
Can I ask that we set up a follow-up discussion with that?
Yeah, we'll follow up. We'll follow up with them. Great. My next question, and the last one for this round, is really for everyone, but Director, this is probably mainly for you. Have we considered considered a very big change to our governing structure that would actually embed, for example, for each police district and each police commander to have in-house in their police district housing inspectors, health inspectors, DPW crews, so that we're eliminating all red tape, and that if they're having issues around a specific issue of housing, they don't have to request someone else to do it. That person is embedded in their district. They know, they're familiar with the crime, they're familiar with the areas, they're familiar with the calls for service and the 311 request, so that this is something that is done inherently and also in-house, so that we don't have to keep crossing lines.
Right. And I think the effort that we're engaging on and that we've outlined this far is speaking to that desire to kind of cut through the red tape and get people coordinating at a very direct and mid-level way, talking about specific issues. In terms of embedding it within the structure of government, that hasn't specifically been considered. I'm not necessarily sure what that would look like. At this point, we're kind of open on suggestions. So I think we'd have to think about the way we do that, but I think
it will be similar. For example, the commissioner has folks that are assigned to task force, right? That are Baltimore police that are on a federal task force or on another task force, so that they don't just simply report to him and then have to say, oh well, I'm also working with these people. They're working directly with that task force. Commissioner, what's the name of it? I'm losing my train of thought. The Regional Auto Theft Task Force is a perfect example. There's a bunch of different agencies working together, and the people across the agencies work out of the same unit, so that there's nothing lost in the communication.
Yeah.
But I can definitely follow up with you.
We can catch up offline. I think the working groups are kind of intended to create that kind of task force around these zones, and so I think that checks the box, but we can talk more, of course.
Yep.
Okay.
Vice Chairman Dorsey.
Thank you. Commissioner Braverman. You mentioned like after midnight kind of visits to these areas. We know that liquor stores and liquor outlets, bars are problematic. There are other businesses that are problematic as well, and the city has a late night operating license. Do we see any correlation between the existence of those or the operation of businesses outside of, where they should have a late night operating license? Do we see things like that? Are they a contributor?
Well, the point of our collaboration with BPD is if we're having problems with a particular location, so we may be getting community complaints from council about a particular location will need help to go there at midnight, we'll turn to BPD and they will go with us. But on the other side, there may be a problem location for criminal activity, and it may be that they're operating late, but they don't have the right use for that. And so BPD isn't necessarily going to know whether the zoning is correct or they have their use is actually within the four corners of the building where it's supposed to be. That stuff we're going to know. So we'll come out with them when there's a problem, and they will go out with us when we need backup at midnight.
So my follow-up is I've had a conversation with Sam about this where we can penalize businesses that have a late night operating license, but are not maintaining their things like their lighting and exterior standards. But if a business does not have that license, we can't penalize them in the same way. The only thing we can do is have the police shut them down for that one night.
Jason Hessler, if you'll permit,
yes,
can respond more directly.
Thank you.
That's okay with Mr. Chair and Mr. Vice Chair?
Thank you.
Jason Hessler, Permits and Code Enforcement, Assistant Commissioner for Litigation. If I understand the question correctly, it really is a licensee in a better position or a worse position than a non-licensee?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just different avenues of attack, so to speak. So if they're unlicensed, that opens the door to find them and address the fact that they're not licensed and they're doing these other activities. If they are licensed, it allows us to go after them and shut them down by revoking the license or some other measure. So we're dealing right now with hookah lounges throughout the city, which present a particular problem to the police department as far as violence. They're operating without the proper zoning because hookah is not allowed throughout the city. So many of them are not licensed. Some of them are licensed. One example, one location has a liquor license. They're allowed to serve liquor. We worked with the liquor board and drafted a letter to them explaining how they would lose their liquor license if they continued to operate in that fashion. That ceased that problem at that location. In other locations where they didn't have the proper zoning and they're not shutting down, we've taken them to district court. We filed injunctions to get them to shut down, get a court order to have them shut down, and then if they continue to operate, have the sanctions assessed to them.
So I guess my question is very generally, do we have the proper tools for addressing businesses or any type of business?
Absolutely.
Okay.
We can address the nuisance activity no matter where it is.
Okay.
The only thing I just wanted to say is we're going to be going to the location based on the criminal activity or the disturbance. So we have not all hookah lounges, are going to fall into that category. It's not the category itself, but it's the activity there. Now, it may be that those particular uses aren't permitted anywhere, but we're working, I think there'll be some bills before council to try and resolve those for, appropriate uses.
Thank you. And I have a couple of questions for Mr. Murphy from Transportation. You spoke earlier about street lights and the 6,500 new street lights, brighter, more luminous. what percentage of the streetlights in the city are maintained by BGE?
Well, we maintain, wait a minute, there's 48,000 that we own, 15,000 of those we maintain, so there's 33,000 that we own that BGE maintains, and BGE has another 27,000 that they own and maintain.
So they maintain the vast majority of the streetlights in the city.
Yes.
There are two types of problems that we face typically with streetlights: bulbs that need to be replaced or cable fault problems.
Yes. The cable faults are much more difficult, as you know, and because they cover a big area.
But the city is much more responsive to both bulbs and cable faults than BGE is typically. Is that correct?
Well, our repair times are shorter, and it's probably because the number of crews we have divided by the number of lights that we take care of is a higher number. So because we do the 15,000, if we had, you know, if we had to do all 48,000, we'd be slower, but you're right, the numbers are quicker for us.
If the streetlight maintenance is a serious point of this strategic approach, coordinated approach, I'm wondering if BGE has been informed of that, if they are aware of how critical this is to this the administration's overall plan, and what they are doing to increase their response times. I understand that cable faults can often take up to 3 months for BGE to repair, and that's where we have whole series of lights. I've driven through, it's not my district, but through Druid Park a couple of times recently and seen half of the lights on the street through the park out.
In fact, we have an outage right now on Green Spring that the Chief of Staff let us know about just the other night, so we made sure to get that into BGE's queue. We had a meeting with BGE today because they're actually they're proposing to help us add to lighting. And we did bring up that one of the issues is that, you know, they'll need to staff up and have more crews to catch up with the number of cable faults that they have now, especially if they're going to take on more. So they are aware that they have to staff up. We don't have any specifics from them yet, but we did have that conversation just today, just before we came to this hearing. That wasn't the intent of the meeting, but that was one of the things that we discussed.
Yeah, 3 months just doesn't seem like an acceptable length of time, and I'd like to have a further conversation about what we can.
Because I don't disagree with you.
And then one last thing while you're here, Bill Cole had mentioned the city's capacity to improve transportation, to access jobs. These transformation zones exist primarily in concentrated areas of poverty, where typically car ownership per household is very, very low. We have household non-access to cars in excess of 70 and 80%. These are people who are relying on public transportation. Yet we have, as you know, I'm always coming back to this, roads that are designed primarily for cars, even in these communities where nobody owns cars. What are we doing? Or has this manner of designing roads for the people who actually need to get around the city been a point of discussion within this coordinated effort?
Well, not specifically, but remember also that these are transit-dependent communities, and the transit service uses the roads as well. So if we repurpose road space away from public vehicles, we also could hamper the transit, operations as well. So we have to be careful what we do. We haven't talked about that specifically as part of this effort, no.
I'd like to hear more about that. Thanks.
Councilman Burnett.
Okay, this is for Director Sid. So only one time in any of these presentations have I heard of a initiative that is of and by and led by the community. So Dr. Nguyen mentioned the Safe Streets initiative using people who are from that lifestyle to connect with other folks to try and prevent. And so what I'm kind of getting at is often city agencies lack credibility, police certainly lack credibility in many of these communities. And even I can speak for myself, you know, in my own neighborhood, now that I'm a politician, I've lost some credibility as well. So don't take it personal. But it's a reality, right? Like, so what are we doing so I haven't heard anything about training people to lead these efforts. And when we talk about the sustainability of any initiative, we all know that if it's not any real community collaboration or training and capacity building for communities to lead these initiatives moving forward, we will be back here in the next few years with a new strategy or a rebranded one that sounds a lot like the same. I'm not saying this is that, but what I am saying is that, you know, I am a little disturbed that we haven't really heard much about community partnerships. We haven't heard about, you know, when you're going out in groups. I did hear in Dr. Brown's presentation around coming out with a community member that's vested in the project, but otherwise I'm not really hearing where there's an effort to really build community sustainable programmings that one, it will help you with this part, because if you're coming into a neighborhood that you know, with only police officers or only with, you know, a DPW crew to pick up trash, that doesn't also involve engaging community residents in picking up trash, or if we're not, you know, if we can't expand safe streets to every district and we're only relying on the police to do that, we're going to be here again. And so I would, one, push all of you to figure out ways to engage communities, to be a part of each one of these efforts, because I can tell you, you're going to go into a neighborhood that folks are going to look at you like an outsider. They're going to treat you like an outsider, and we're not going to get anywhere with this.
Right, and you're absolutely right. And you know, I talked about phase one being our internal process, and certainly phase two, which I think is absolutely critical for this to work, is that community engagement piece. Because I'll be honest, and I've noticed this in my couple years in city government, if it's just city government doing this, our chances of success are extremely diminished. Everybody has to have some level of ownership and a stake in the outcome of this effort to reduce violent crime. I will say that, and Commissioner, I might call on you to talk a little bit more about this. One of the key components of this plan are the neighborhood coordinating officers that'll be deployed to each one of the 4 zones, and they are specifically being installed to build that relationship with the community so that there is that tie between violent crime and our efforts strategically to do some cross-agency work in each of the zones. And Commissioner, I don't know if you want to talk more about that part.
So getting our own internal game plan set was phase one. And so there's no doubt that we're going to do bigger and better things to involve the community in this effort. Some things you probably know, we had 0 police chaplains before the unrest. We have 134 right now. That's an ongoing relationship, so we're going to rely on the chaplains to be a big part of this as well. We had a several-year hiatus with the Citizens Police Academy. So we're about to start our 2nd police academy in as few as 3 or 4 months, just next month. We're going to start a youth Citizens Police Academy just after that. I have a youth advisory board that we meet with once a month. So we know that involving the community is the only way forward to sustain this. We do think we're going to be successful as a team, because together we can't fail. Individually, it's much more challenging, and the community is part of this team effort. So that's going to be part of the plan.
And so I'll just add, again, and not directed to you specifically, but there's a big difference between a partnership and engagement, right? So we have, DPW has people liaisons that go to community meetings, and they tell them what's happening. They tell them what the agency is doing. You have officers that come and report on what is happening. So yes, that's engaging, but what I'm asking is, how are we building community capacity, doing leadership development, training them to do the things that you're trying to do on that local level, so that it becomes more sustainable? And again, this is not directed, anyone can kind of jump in, but it's the difference between, like, I showed up at a meeting and I said something, right? So this kind of came up at the last public safety meeting where I can't remember which one of your staff mentioned that there's more of an effort to do more youth engagement and play basketball, right? And so the question I asked was, well, what are the goals that you're setting for how many kids are showing up for basketball every year? And in year one, our goal is 30 kids, right? In one neighborhood. In year two, we want to expand that to 60 kids. And we're also going to assess our officers on the number of outreach efforts they did to sign kids up for basketball. Because it's not a matter of just something happened. And this is what I was trying to get at with Director Sid, is it's not just we had an event. It's we had an event and this is what we're going to use it to build on, right? You kind of get what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. And,
Yeah.
and it's not just hosting events and then checking that off the list of community engagement. You're right, that's not community engagement. But what is community engagement is our chaplains program. That's the real deal. They come out with us, they work with us in the community all the time. So that's engagement, and that's ongoing. And that's something that's, quite frankly, just been jump-started in the past 2 years. The Youth Advisory Board, my Youth Advisory Board, that's engagement. The LGBT meetings that I have with that committee every month is engagement, because they have helped shape policies on the BPD. So that's a back and forth. So I would just encourage you guys that the things that concern you and cause you angst, and you're wondering if we're doing that hard, important work, come take a look at what we're doing. I invite any of you to take a look at any program that we're involved in, and come on by and take a look. And I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. We got a long way to go, but we're certainly committed to getting there.
Sure. Okay, Director John.
Councilman, thank you for teeing up. And I think you're absolutely correct. I mean, many of us take the position we take, and instantaneously we lost the credibility, right? But as you mentioned, now I would say phase one of what DPW had done in the past is create that neighborhood liaisons, establishing that relationship, and at least getting so-called our folks knowing who is in the leadership in the communities, for nothing else, know who they are, their name, to build that fundamental relationships. But then at the end of the day, that engagement isn't enough, right? The partnership is what is counted, just like you mentioned. Now, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with Clean Corp, right? Clean Corp is an initiative that we are pushing out. It is designed to engage the communities, to getting community to be true partners to us, where there is sufficient buy-in to the things that we do. As I mentioned earlier, when I do my presentation, we know DPW alone, we cannot single-handedly clean the city every second of the day without true partnership from the community. So that we had to reach out. And so I would take this opportunity to say, we are reorganizing our solid waste operation. We all know that in the past we all operated under what we call a task-oriented, right? So we have the cleaning crews, we have the mixed refuse crew, we have the boarding crew, we are breaking ourselves into the zones as well, right? Into the 4 zones, using the North Charles Street and North Avenue as a dividing line into the 4 equal pots, is to create that partnership in the communities, where partnership, the leaders and the citizens living in the neighborhood knows who is serving them from all aspects of solid waste operation. It's no longer says, well, I have a rat problem, who do I call? And it's that problem. So we don't really have that relationship built. It is to reorganize ourselves so our folks know exactly who they're serving, and the citizens know exactly who is serving them, to build that relationship, build that credibility, build that trust. So it's just a matter of picking up the phone and says, you know what, I have a problem on this street, with this street corner, I have this trash, rather than so-called climb the chain of command all the way up to me and I pass it on to someone else, that really the community person had no idea who is actually picking up the trash for them. I want to build a relationship that they know who, and personally know and have that personal engagement with others to get to the point that you are making. Is only through true partnership we will succeed in doing what we do. Thank you.
Thank you. And just to kind of clarify what I was getting at, something that Councilwoman Snead mentioned was tracking conversations. I thought that was a great point because in my background in organizing, you know, we tracked how many doors did you knock, how many conversations did you have, how many leaders did you identify, what were those conversations like, what were some leaders, and what is the follow-up plan with those individual leaders. A very deep drill down, so it's not that we just put out flyers for a cleanup, but that we actually would really like, and I'm just challenging you as agency heads to really look at how you measure the work that staff is doing, and so that it does really go down really deep so that we can really track the impact and the outcomes of these programs. And so I would, you know, challenge City Stat to add those kind of metrics, because I think they're really important. And again, using that as a report out, because I can assure you when we come back, those are the kind of things I'm going to be asking again and again, because I think we have to really, you know, again, it's nothing personal, but we have to really push how we do business in the city, and it can't be more the same. The last question I had was for Bill Cole. One of the things that we mentioned earlier or discussed earlier was efforts for, you know, job training, job readiness, employment. But one of the things that when we talk about the violence and the crime in the city, I've actually heard some very innovative things that folks in criminal enterprises are doing. And for me, it's one, kind of troubling that the level of sophistication, but the other piece that stands out to me is the level of entrepreneurial spirit that our young people have. And so I want to know what part in this effort, or just citywide, are we doing small business development and training for our young people as well? Because as we know, a lot of millennials like myself aren't looking for a career path, because those career paths aren't there. No one's working at a factory for 40 years and supporting their family on that. But we do know that they're very innovative. And so what efforts are being made to reach out to young people, reach out to, and not just kids, young adults, older adults, to really grow businesses in these transformation zones? Because I see a lot of potential in these areas to help people, get them a job, that's great, but also help them grow a business. And what role do you think BDC can play in that?
Obviously, I agree with you wholeheartedly, and those small businesses in neighborhoods can create jobs at a faster rate than anything else we do. Right now, we're using our microloan program to help get those small businesses started, but people have to get to a point where they have a viable business. So I know the mayor wants to continue to improve the Small Business Resource Center that's run by Paul Taylor, trying to find ways to get them additional resources to do the trainings, the seminars that they're already doing. Paul does a great job, and he offers them throughout the year, but we need to make certain that they're available to everybody. The other thing is we've got a ton of social entrepreneurship incubators and accelerators that are popping up right now. The city started with the Emerging Technology Center, which is run through BDC, as the one incubator in the city. It has 2 locations now. There are somewhere around 25 incubators or accelerators in the region, and 17 of them are in the city of Baltimore. 2 of them are city-run, the 2 locations BTC. So what I'm saying is that there's a lot of other people that have come into this. We need to look to the universities as partners. Clearly, the University of Baltimore has an entrepreneurship center. Morgan, Coppin, they all have opportunities to play a role in creating business development type training. And because we can't afford to fund it all, obviously, but the universities could help on that. So it's about partnerships. You'll hear it a lot from the mayor. I know the Chief of Staff says it a lot as well. Collaboration. So we're looking for ways to partner with higher ed to help us reach broader audiences. I also think some of it may go to the school system as well, figuring out how to make these opportunities available to high school juniors and seniors or sophomores or whatever age group makes sense, so that they understand that being an entrepreneur, being in business for yourself is a career, can be a career. You can be your own boss. You don't have to necessarily go work for somebody else. If you have an idea, you have discipline. If we can make capital accessible, that's the last piece, is figuring out how do we make capital accessible. And like I said, we have a loan program right now that has been very successful. We've provided financing in small increments to more than 100 Baltimore startups or small businesses. More than half of those are MBE, WBE. So we know that the program works, but it's a finite source of revenue. And we also don't like giving away money because then it won't be there for the next business. So we look for businesses that have capacity to survive and grow. So, you know, getting people in that pipeline, working with Paul, getting the training done, ensuring that people understand what their options are, finding the partners. I think there's ways to make it work. But you've seen just in your neighborhood how hard it is to get those storefronts filled.
Yeah. Thank you.
We're going to have Councilman Pinkett, and then I have questions, and we'll take testimony, and we'll let everyone go home to get their dinner. Councilman Pinkett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate Mayor Pugh's efforts for the call to action. So I guess my question is there potential for that group to be expanded in subsequent calls to action? And what efforts are we making to make certain it is as inclusive as possible?
Madam Chief of Staff, please state your name for the record.
Tisha Edwards, Chief of Staff for Mayor Pugh. Good evening, council members. Councilman Pinkett, the answer to that is absolutely. And so the mayor has been thinking through what the deliverables and what the action is going to be. Those call to actions are really about putting solutions in the hands of the community. It's not a session where we come and complain, and it's not a session where cabinet is doing a show and tell. It's asking the community to come and help her to think through how the community can take back the neighborhoods. And so the answer to your question is yes. She has her second call to action scheduled on March the 6th. It is what we call the small group, which is 95 people. And then in early April, she's going to do more of a citywide call to action. We're trying to find a location that can have both the larger conversation and breakout rooms because it is a work session for community to be at the center of the solution. And so you're absolutely right. She is expanding the opportunity, trying to make it as inclusive as possible, but we're trying to roll that out in an intentional way so that it's not a waste of people's time and so that we can stay very solutions oriented.
Okay, thank you. My next question was for Director Vondrasek. I think this is, I was trying to find you something that was down the stream. I was trying to find you, something that you could do that was down the stream. Before you mentioned all your activities were upstream.
Okay.
Has there been, as a part of this, has there been any funds identified for, I guess, what would be called defensive landscaping, where your forestry department can do efforts or target certain areas and communities where, you're trimming trees and doing stuff to make areas more brighter, or I know of like one area in particular at the Penn North Metro stop where the drug dealers just feel like that the little park area is theirs and they're under the cover of the trees and they can just get away with anything. Have you targeted areas where forestry can be a part of the policing efforts?
Yeah, I know that Eric has looked at the Penn North intersection. He's also gone and done windshield surveys. Eric is our arborist. His staff, they've gone and looked at all 4 of the transformation zones. He's given me numbers. He knows how many trees are there, what it would cost to do proactive pruning. He can roll that right into his budget. Where he could go to plant new trees in existing pits, how many opportunities there are for cutting new pits. I mean, I have all that. I didn't get to that during my slide, but he's got a real successful proactive tree pruning program that he's kind of rolling through the whole city on. And he's showing that if he touches these trees that are, about 5 inches in diameter and touches them a few times and does the right kind of pruning, he's going to have less SRs down the road. And it's starting to show, he's enough years into this. And so I know he's ready to jump into these transformation zones as he goes into other parts of the city. So.
Okay. Thank you. My last question was for Dr. Nguyen. I think we've had some success around the Lexington market area with our outreach workers. Is a part of this effort, additional resources for you so that you can have more outreach workers on the street to really help with substance abuse issues.
Thank you. So we, again, to the point, I think that was very well said earlier about the need for community engagement. I want to just mention that for all of our outreach efforts, especially around addiction and mental health issues, the people that we employ are individuals in recovery themselves. And we partner with community-based organizations because we know that their reach is a lot more effective, right? For me to go and say, stop taking drugs or don't overdose, it's a different message as a physician than for someone who has really been there to say, look, this is what I lived through. I was able to do this, and now you have to save lives too. So we work closely with our community-based groups. We also have redirected the resources of community groups, and have harnessed our volunteer corps as well. So all this work, all this additional work around overdose is basically, I mean, some of it is a little bit through grants here and there, but a lot of it is just through working with our community groups and getting the communities involved. And so specifically the trainings that we've done across the city, including in Lexington Market, we do mapping as well. We map out where it is that overdoses are occurring. And we target those particular areas, including in real time. We work with the police department, the fire department, HIDA, and others to find out where exactly those overdoses are occurring, especially for fentanyl, and we target accordingly. And so we'll continue those efforts, and I think especially in light of the huge numbers. I mean, the number of people dying from fentanyl around the country is unprecedented. In Baltimore City alone, we've seen the number of people dying in the last 3 years alone increase by 20 times. Right. 20 times. I mean, these are unprecedented numbers nationally. So we'll redouble our efforts. But again, understanding that we, just like all of our colleagues here today, we do a lot with very little.
No, I just brought it up because I think it's critical for you and your partners to have those resources so that you can actually have, those outreach workers on the street building relationships and really, being impactful.
We would agree with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Commissioner, my next to last question is for you. I know that we have a great relationship with Community Mediation. As you know, it's an organization that I'm very fond of. Have we considered expanding our partnership with groups like Community Mediation to having them help resolve conflict that lead to violence? Because as you and I know, it's not just the guns and drugs anymore. There are simple neighborhood conflicts, social media abuse from adults and children, and instances where there's multiple people seeing the same, male or female, that end up in the loss of life. Have we thought about expanding our partnership with groups like Community Mediation where we can have the intelligence that we know that our officers have in each district, to have them intercede, because they are respected in the community, to Councilman Burnett's point of view, but also they're respected in the community and they have a proven record of resolving conflict for us, as we know, with the police department.
Yeah, sure, Mr. Chair. And I think the first thing is to get these 500 mediations that we have in store for 2017 done. You look at some of our homicide motives and our non-fatal shooting motives, and there's a category that just says dispute. And that dispute is often always very, very minor and trivial and ridiculous, to tell you the truth. And it's because young people, young males in particular, lack those conflict mediation skills. And that's why I've been steadfast in my commitment to do something about the existing gun laws in Maryland, because they're misdemeanors. It's a misdemeanor offense to illegally stick a gun in your waistband and walk out into the streets of Baltimore. And putting a gun in a young man's waistband or under the front seat of his car is something that he's going to go to resolve conflict, because he doesn't sadly possess conflict mediation skills. So expanding it is something that I think is a natural next step. I'm glad we have it. I'm glad it's here. I think 2016 was a kind of a first step with getting cops and young people together on a 1-to-1 ratio. We added an entire day of in-service training just to afford our police officers the opportunity, the experience rather, of being one-on-one with a young person all day long for an outward bound experience. And we think that this community mediation is the next step, and perhaps the the step after that is what you just articulated, getting them involved in preventive ways.
Thank you.
Sir.
And the last question, and I don't know who's the best person to answer this, Dr. Nguyen, maybe you. Does anyone know in its totality the amount of money that the city itself spends, either through grants to organizations like Center for Urban Families or others, around family strengthening training programs, these kind of programs that we know prevent violence from happening in the long run? Do we have a dollar amount attached to that? Can we figure out before the next time we come back how much money we spend on that, Director? How much money does the city spend or grant out to other organizations on family strengthening training programs? We're now going to move to public testimony. We're going to call the people in order. We ask that everyone keep their comments have to be directed directly to the council and not to the panel or the agency members, and also try to keep your comments to 3 minutes. The first person that signed up and indicated that they want to testify is Mr. or Mrs. T. Shine.
Hello. Hi.
Good evening, ma'am.
Yeah,
Please
hi,
state your name for the record.
Thank you for allowing me to come in your space. My name is Tomiko Shine, and I am the lead organizer with Maryland RAP, and we work to get elderly people out of prison. And most of these folks have served in Baltimore or Maryland 30, 40, 50 years. Our longest member did 64 years in Maryland prisons. I also am a research anthropologist. What led me to do my research was looking at black-on-black violence and why it has occurred after this group historically was one that was enslaved and assaulted by violence, and then why they turned on one another. One of the things I want to mention is that as I look at African Americans, I look at their life cycle development and identity and behavior and how that occurs. And so what we see with people of African descent, they have been held within a structural violence setting. And so often throughout the centuries, they have either been the target or the product or both. And so we see this has gone through the thread of policies and laws, this institutional racism, this structural violence, and this affects their psychological development. And so Baltimore City is a very good example of the result of even what we're talking about today. And so one of the 3 issues I want to kind of focus on, I'm gonna give some suggestions, is that of illiteracy, education, decarceration, and the black family. One of the things I want to mention with the illiteracy is that Baltimore has high illiteracy rates. I know several decades ago, Kurt Smoke tried to present a program in the city that reads, and it's very important because we know that literacy and poverty leads directly to, I'm sorry, I'm a little nervous, let me calm down, leads to imprisonment. And so one of the things that I noticed is that in DC this last summer, I was participating with the Metropolitan Police Station department. They did this thing called Beat the Streets, and it was every week in these high crime neighborhoods, and it was like a crime prevention. And so I called them and asked them could I participate, and I ended up giving away about 500 books. And so one of the things I found, and this is in all urban cities, is not only are the children having difficulty reading, but their young parents are not reading at high reading levels. But also under education, there needs to be more jobs, more training, more apprenticeships within the schools. Also, more skill sets need to be brought back within the schools. Green jobs, there needs to be more training provided for that. I had an experience where I was at the DMV, and the lady was doing a kiosk, and she was taking a long time, and I asked her, do you need some assistance? And she said yes, and what happened, she said, I don't know how to do it because I'm used to working it on my phone. So I encouraged her to do computers, some type of computer training. The second area is that of decarceration. With the RAP campaign, we have folks that, like I said, have done 30, 40, 50 years, but they were incarcerated very young. One of our members, her son was incarcerated at 14, about 30 years ago in an adult prison. And so one of the things I think should be done is a restorative justice model should begin to be applied. And so mental health courts, drug courts, domestic violence programs. We have a lady who we're trying to advocate for now in her 39th year, and she had been abused before being sentenced at 18 years old to prison. Also, some countries are doing like a community tribunal spaces where the person who may have assaulted, they have to come and meet the family, the victims. And so I think this is also something that should be done. As far as with the police and the schools, at one time there was something called officer friendly. And so it wasn't the definition of what was safe was something different. It was a collaboration. And the Citizen Project recently released a report where Maryland has the highest incarceration rate in the country, 74%, which is African Americans. The third issue I want to focus on is that of the black family itself. And so I think that maybe something could be done to have maybe 3 to 4 year plans and intervals. The Native American group, they plan out 8 generations. Some countries in Asia, they plan out 50 to 100 years. So it's maybe something in Baltimore City, some type of task force commission just for trying to re-engage the black family. I think this should be a collaborative effort with colleges and senior centers involved, and this leads to an intergenerational where it's not affecting the life cycle development. Also, in some countries in Europe, what they're trying to do to assist with their young people from engaging in violence and also going to prison, they started doing listening tours. So maybe the city council, along with other agencies, can do listening tours within their districts throughout Baltimore City. Also, there is a Children of Incarcerated Parents bill that was done in 2009 in California. I would like to ask maybe if the city council could consider passing this bill, maybe even making a resolution, because we have a lot of children in Baltimore City whose parents are incarcerated. And just to not go off a little bit, but the children that we saw, the young people with the uprising, those are the children and the grandchildren that we're talking about that have been in prison and also victims of violence. So they're a little upset. Also, I would like to see maybe a task force of women who have been incarcerated, because most of those are mothers. Most of the mothers, over 50%, have a child that have been incarcerated. And in Maryland, there's about a little over 1,000 incarcerated. Quite a bit of those are lifers. Another issue that causes ones to be incarcerated so long, and even has caused some to maybe even commit suicide in prisons, is a parole board. We're advocating for the parole board and some of these commissions to be more civilian-based, meaning civilians from the community, professionals, even those maybe informally incarcerated should be on this parole board. And my last point is that there needs to be more of a focus on early childhood development. This plan I'm talking about needs to be done in generations, because what we're talking about is generational cycle that is occurring that has brought us here. And so the generation now, like the 1 to 2 year old, if we can plan to focus on them, then maybe we could begin to break this cycle. And this isn't going to be done in one political cycle, what we're talking about here, but maybe like in 3 or 4 cycles, we may begin to see some change. And so what it's going to take, I think, is a lot of creativity and a lot of imagination. And if the programming is done right, not only are you going to be able to teach the children and develop them properly, but also the parent and the family, and we'll begin to change the community in the city. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. Ms. Christina Delgado. A resident of the 2nd District, we were second to none.
So I wrote everything down to try to be concise. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Christina Delgado. I represent the Bel Air Edison community as a 10-year resident and community organizer in Bel Air Edison, located in Northeast Baltimore. A lot of what I wanted to say was already mentioned, but 2 things that I didn't hear tonight, parking enforcement issues. So petty crime equates to larger crimes. Illegally parked cars, expired tags, abandoned vehicles run rampant in Bel Air Edison. Parking violations need to be enforced. Can the police help with this on a consistent basis? 311, there's constant misinformation that I have firsthand experience, but also that I hear from residents. For example, 311 informed residents that petitions are needed to test lighting and receive additional lighting. And as an organizer, this isn't helpful with engaging residents to advocate for their block. It's defeating. 311 non-emergency police tend to be mostly rude and condescending. How can I convince others to not be afraid to make claims when I know the system and I still feel like I'm not being heard? Has 311 been looped into these conversations that we're having, that we're talking about today? In my experience as an organizer, city agencies liaisons don't do their jobs to truly engage. They do surface stuff, they check the boxes. Agencies need to be connected to actual organizers such as myself and community leaders that are in the trenches every single day. Clean Corps is a helpful idea, but like most city initiatives, it's broken and inconsistent. Clean Corp's communities have recently been told that the program is on hold because the city is currently trying to restructure it. Hopefully that will be different when they have their meeting March 8th. The most regular complaint from city reps in the conversations that I've had is the lack of resource or manpower. If that's the case, I think that it's helpful to find ways to hire more part-time people, maybe even partner with colleges and have college interns working internally, creating workforce development around the needs, and we've talked about that. Have other agencies help out. Like, for example, street sweepers contacting parking enforcement if cars are parked illegally, instead of residents contacting parking enforcement because cars are parked illegally to get their streets swept. Having workforce development agencies located at police precincts, you kind of touched on that earlier. Agencies really need to collaborate at the ground level. I was teaching at a first grade class today, and while reading one of the bulletin boards, it made me think, what if firefighters only fought fires sometimes, or only made sure that people in more affluent neighborhoods were safe? What would that look like? And so my question is, why should the expectation be any different for any other city agency? Though there's have been some very nice efforts presented this evening, most of them are nothing new, and I can't help but feel that some of what is said is just lip service, minus Commissioner Davis and Dr. Wen. The heads of these departments seem to get it, but my question is, does their staff get it? Are the people on the ground really willing to put forth the effort it will take to implement these ideas effectively? Any city agency or city representative that doesn't see a connection to their lack of action and the systemic issues we have in Baltimore City should consider themselves oblivious and apathetic. We need people that like their job, know their job, and are willing to excel in their job because it's their duty to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. Shantae Guy. All right. Mr. Hollenbach.
How's it going? Just regarding violence, since we're talking about public safety, I wanted to just first say, there's a quote that MLK says that darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. And the same is true with violence, that you cannot fight violence with violence. So with policing, you cannot fight a violent crime with police who have loaded guns. You have to find some other way to do it. So if we keep giving, so the question is, why do we have police with guns that have the ability to kill if that's not contributing to safety? So, and also, if you give police guns and you give them the right to kill, why are we giving police the right to kill? As far as I'm concerned, as far as I know, the courts are the ones who have the right to kill. So why are we giving the police the right to kill? The second thing is, if you want to rebuild trust in communities, you need to convict people who have committed murder. And in this city, we've had police who have done that, and we need to hold them accountable. And if you want to rebuild trust, that involves you doing that. The other thing is, if we have more police with jobs than people in communities with jobs, then that's a problem. And the people in the communities know that the police are getting paid more than the people in the community. So we need to, if we have $437 million in the budget that's going to policing, and we have 137 towards education, or we don't have enough going to housing, or to people in communities who need jobs. You have so many people in these communities who need jobs, and they're talking about they have to get jobs at places in other communities. We need to build jobs in the communities that these people are living in. That's why you have violence going on, because people don't have jobs. People don't have resources. And if you if the resources are going towards police who are then committing crimes, then you have no trust in the community. And that's just the cyclical nature of our system. But we need to start reallocating resources into the communities, and we need to stop giving it to police, because violence does not stop violence. So we need to rethink the ways that we do that. Also, just regarding what the other councilman said, She was talking about how can the police stop loitering on Monument Street, and you don't call when people are in the inner harbor loitering when it's a bunch of white people in the inner harbor. So we can't just call it loitering, have the police try to fight loitering. You have to, that's just people who are in the community. They need jobs, they need resources, they need things that they can do. It's not a negative thing if you have people hanging out on the streets. They just have to have something to do. They could be contributing to businesses, but there's no local businesses. And then if you're worried about trash on the streets, then people need to have stake in their community. They need to own things in their community. You need to have businesses that are owned by the people. You need to have houses that are owned by the people. If you don't own your house, you're not going to treat it with respect, and other people aren't going to treat it with respect if they don't own parts of the city. That's why people litter. The Wall Street Journal just published an article saying that, the Wall Street Journal has no stake in saying anything either way, but that increase in police, in money in policing does not lead to a decrease in crime. And with parks and recreation, we need to use our parks as food resources and resources with things that are actually contributing to the community being self-sustainable. And it's just another thing for the importance of the call to action. What I'm worried about with these calls to action in these meetings is that it becomes a call to action. We talk about it, we have a meeting, but it doesn't result in anything that we actually tangibly see. Because if it did, then why did the streets look like they do? Why did the schools have so limited resources? We want to see these tangible things, and you talk about the theory of this, but I want to see where those things happen in the community. And then shutting down liquor stores isn't gonna stop people being alcoholics. Like, you can't shut down one liquor store, think that that's gonna be like, oh, no one's gonna drink anymore. Like, if you shut down a liquor store, they're just gonna go to the next liquor store, or a new businessman is gonna open up another liquor store. And if you're worried about people being drug dealers, you need to worry about the junkies. So we're not treating junkies, we're just busting drug dealers. Like, why don't we have more programs to treat junkies? But we're using all these resources to go to people just to put drug dealers in jail. And it just seems a little ridiculous. That's it. I just think we need to focus on a full system that we can actually push forward of positivity. Because it's like doing the same things that we're doing over and over again. And we keep asking the same people, and they don't seem like they know what the right things are.
Thank you.
That's all.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Everyone, I know that we were here late tonight, but I just want to remind everyone that 48 people have lost their lives in the city this evening, so I think that a little inconvenience from all of us. Ms. Guy, you would like to speak?
Thank you. I'm sorry, I won't keep you all late. I was not prepared to give formal remarks. My name is Shantae Guy. I'm the Executive Director of Community Mediation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the City Council. I will be brief, again, because I didn't prepare anything. I do want to express my gratitude to the Police Commissioner and to the Health Commissioner and to the directors of the agencies that are around the room for taking the time to engage in these very meaningful conversations around how we heal our city. I'm intrigued by the propositions that I've seen, and I'm hopeful that this work is going to benefit those that have been traditionally underserved in our city. In addition to partnering with Baltimore City Police Department, we also partner with a whole host of other city organizations, but what's more important than the partnering with the city is that we are a community-led organization, that we have been at the corner of Greenmount and 33rd, and so we are in the community for the last 21 years, that we are actively engaging folks at any point in the disputes that they're having, and we are engaging gang members, we are engaging landlords and tenants that have issues, we are engaging neighbors that don't get along that potentially escalate into other issues. We are also engaging students that are bullying other students. We're engaging parents that have issues with attendance with their children. We are engaging Baltimore as a whole, and we're able to do that again because of our volunteer corps. We have credibility in the neighborhoods that we go into across Baltimore City because our volunteers are from those communities. Our board members are reflective of what our neighborhoods look like. We have a formerly incarcerated member, a formerly incarcerated board member. We have from the baby boomer generation all the way through the current generation of Generation Z on our board. So as you all continue to have your conversations about community organizations that you'd like to bring to the table, I'll leave you with this. And Commissioner, I'm sorry, I know I'm supposed to be directing this to the council. Council, I'll leave you with this. I am hopeful that the NCOs will be able to model what BPD saw in New York. And even with relationship building training, it is always necessary to unpack what went wrong in the relationship first before you can enter into building a relationship, especially a relationship that has been as eroded for as long as it has been in Baltimore City, and not just with the police department, but with communities as a whole. Thank you very much for your time.
Mr. Morton. Mr. Morton is the last person that's going to testify this evening.
Thank you. My name is Tyrone Morton, and I understand violence, a little bit of it. I was incarcerated for 30 years. I had a double murder charge, one murder on the street and one murder while I was incarcerated. So the one thing that I understand, violence begets violence. And when you look at Ferguson, when you look at what happened in Baltimore, it's the same thing about to happen in all the cities across this country. And that's because a group of people have been disenfranchised for hundreds of years. And disenfranchised simply means that the pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness, the 14th Amendment or due process of law, was not granted to that group of people. And while I was in the joint, I began to think about it. I say, now, I came from a good family. I'm a Morton. My family been in business in this town over 100 years. But I watched, when I was growing up, I watched anger in the black men that I was around. And I didn't understand what I was looking at. So I came up in an environment that was permeated with nothing but violence. I saw that. So it was easy for me to trip out and engage in violent activity. So I ended up doing time, over 15 years in the penitentiary. But let me leave you with this. Each of you has said something very important in this room. Each of you has a part of the puzzle. But the number one thing that you got to understand, if you want to help the people in Baltimore City, you got to give them the resources that they begin to help themselves. You don't teach them, you don't show them how to fish, you teach them how to fish. They got to learn to stand up for themselves, or else we're going to be back here again. We're going to be back here again. Now, education, and I'm going to shut up after this year. Education, yes sir, education is so important because when I went into the joints, most of the guys that were around me were uneducated. They came from broken families. I didn't come from that. I was trained at parochial schools. I studied at the seminary out here in Cub Hill Road, out in Towson, Maryland, as a kid. So I was knowledgeable. So when I got in there, I started reading. When a child is growing up, when a young person is growing up, this is the field of psychology. When a young person is growing up, the first thing that he is introduced to is the family. If the family is broken up, especially the mother, he can't develop trust. Eric Erickson's Childhood and Society, trust versus distrust. So if the mother ain't right, she's a drug addict, etc., in the black community, then the kid, he gonna get that, he gonna feel that. The school system is supposed to be able to, when you matriculate in a school system, the educational process, it's supposed to teach you the culture. Trust versus mistrust is one level. Another level is industry versus inferiority. If I grow up in a culture where people show me nothing but hatred, people disparage me because of the color of my skin, then I'm going to develop a sense of inferiority, not industry. And school is supposed to help you develop a sense of Let's go get it. Let's get out there. And as you grow in the school system,
Mr. Morton,
yes, sir.
wrap it up, sir, please.
Technologically, look at the kids out here today. They not technologically trained because most of them didn't go through that process of growing up and going through that school process. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morton. Thank you so much. The public safety, we're going to recess this hearing, so the Public Safety Committee stands in recess. Please check the area around your seats. Make sure you don't leave anything. The room will be closing in just a few minutes. Thank you all. Good night.